it looks like the situation is way far from being resolved. And so we have had players looking for advice regarding how to treat the situation. Then so far our answer has been mostly stick to Annex 7, although there might be situations where Annex 7 may not even cover all the issues. So Adrian will be the moderator of this topic, and as I leave the word with you.
Thank you for this introduction. I don't think I could have done it better myself. So we're indeed going to be discussing the war in Ukraine and how it affected football and how FIFA and Uefa dealt with it. But first, I'd like to introduce you to my panel. From right to left, I have Theresa Riemer from Germany next to me, Lottie Roelofs from the Netherlands, and I have Parth Singh from India. I would like to have a round of applause for this panel. And then let's get started. So the first topic we're going to be discussing is the legal basis of the measures taken by FIFA and Uefa. Secondly, we'll be discussing the labor law issues in Ukraine and Russia and what's next for the Premier League in Russia and Ukraine, sorry. And lastly, we'll be discussing the topic, the concept of neutrality in sports. So let's get going. So it all started with the invasion of Russia in Ukraine and the Polish Federation declaring that they did not want to compete against Russia in the World Cup playoff match. So they did not want to play the game against Russia at all. FIFA first reacted mildly and proposed to relocate the match to another country to play it in a neutral stadium. But the Polish Federation did not want to play against Russia at all, regardless of the name of the team consisting of Russian players and regardless of the place where the game was played. So they did not want to play at all, and the public pressure was rising. So eventually, FIFA and Uefa had to act up, and they took some drastic measures. On the 28th of February, FIFA and Uefa announced in a joint statement that all Russian teams, so all Russian club teams and the Russian national team, would be suspended from all UEFA and FIFA competitions until further notice. For Russian teams and the Russian Federation itself immediately appealed this decision of FIFA and UEFA and requested to stay the execution of this decision. As we all know, we saw it in clause, I think, as well. CAS immediately denied the request of the Russian Federation to stay the execution. So the measures were feasible, and the Russian teams and the Russian national team were in fact suspended from all the UEFA and FIFA competitions. But since we're still waiting on a final award from the Court of Arbitration, Theresa, I'm going to you. Could you maybe give your view on the suspension, on the measures taken by FIFA and UEFA? Did they have a legal basis to take these measures?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to have this roundtable with you. The measures taken by FIFA and UEFA required a particular haste, but weren't without legal basis. Every sport governing body is bound by their own rules and regulations, such as FIFA and UEFA. So as starting point, we can consider Article 16 FIFA statutes. Article 16 FIFA statutes allows FIFA to temporarily suspend a member association if the member association itself violates the rules and regulations. Besides of this, we have a huge commitment to human rights in the FIFA statutes. Article 3 FIFA statute states that FIFA is respecting and promoting human rights, and also the discrimination of countries, people, or groups is strictly prohibited under Article 4 FIFA statutes, as well as that FIFA is promoting a good relationship between the member associations. But we also have to consider that Football Union Russia is independent from the Russian government. At least we don't have so much evidence, like in anti-doping cases, that there is an impact of the Russian government, and due to the fact that the Russian government started the war and not football union Russia, to rely just on these rules would be insufficient. But we also have to consider that FIFA, in his statutes, Article 2, FIFA's objective is to organize international competition, and FIFA is responsible for the FIFA World Cup and has therefore a discretion to take measures to ensure a smooth running competition. In Article 331 FIFA regulation for the World Cup in Qatar, FIFA is able to take measures in cases of force majeure or unexpected situations. Besides of this, it is also interesting that it was not the first time that a member association was suspended. There are other precedents, such as, for example, in 1961 and 1964 and 1970, when FIFA suspended the South African Association and Rhodesia due to their racial segregation policy, as well as 30 years ago, Yugoslavia was banned because of the human rights violation during the Balkan War. And also Mexico was suspended 1988 because they played with an overage player in the youth competition. So to summarize everything, FIFA is competent to suspend a member association if there's a violation of the rules, and also to ensure a smooth running competition such as FIFA World Cup.
Thank you, Teresa. So as you pointed out, they had the legal power to do so, but they had to act very quick, and it was an urgent matter. So do you think that it was the right thing to do, that they did it good, that they did a good thing?
Well, right or fair, this is really difficult to answer. I mean, in a legal aspect, we have to consider legal principles such as proportionality or balance of interest. So if I represent a purely athletic opinion, of course, it would be unfair. Athletes dedicate all their life to compete in this unique competition, and they will lose sponsorships now. They will lose revenues. So of course it's unfair, but we also have to consider, in my opinion, the balance of interest and also the interest of FIFA and all the other participants to ensure the security of the participants and to ensure a smooth running competition. So the interest of the other participants outweighed the interest of Football Union Russia. The financial damages can be compensated later, and we also have to consider that Russia is suspended just for this year, but not for the entire life. And to play on a neutral pitch, it was not possible because not only the Polish association declared not to play against Russia, there were like the Czech Republic or the Swedish association in the qualification round. So yes, in my opinion, it was fair.
Okay. Bart, I see you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that throughout the invasion of Ukraine, since it began, there has definitely been a sense of unease and a sense of underconfidence throughout the actions of FIFA. This is definitely because Russia is a huge stakeholder in world football. Of course, they have hosted the World Cup just a few years ago, and any kind of concrete or very sudden actions towards it could alienate a huge chunk of the market. And not to mention that these are unprecedented circumstances. As Teresa mentioned, there have been many similar events before, but this is the first time we're experiencing a sovereign invasion. That needs to be factored in.
Okay, thank you, Bart. So to summarize, it's indeed quite of a difficult and unprecedented situation we're in, and it's, as you mentioned, Teresa, finding the right balance between the interests of the athletes, but also the general safety and measures that need to be taken. So it's not an easy option. It's not easy for FIFA and Uefa to act up in these situations. And it's the same for our second topic, the employment-related issues. So as was already mentioned, FIFA decided in coordination with Uefa to amend temporary employment regulations in Annex 7 of the FIFA RSTP. And more concrete, for foreign players and foreign coaches in Ukraine, they decided that their contracts would be suspended until the end of the season, and that foreign players and coaches were free to go and play elsewhere for the remainder of the season. For Russia, they had a similar approach. If foreign players and coaches in Russia, in the Russian competition, could not find a mutual agreement with their club, they had the right to unilateral suspend their contracts until the end of the season and go play abroad as well. So it's a temporary measure for the foreign players and coaches in Ukraine and Russia. So they were given the permission to go and play abroad for the remainder of the season without any consequences. These measures were taken in the beginning of March. And now we're halfway June. Bart, looking back a few months later on these measures, what's your take on it? Did it affect that FIFA wanted?
Well, it's public news that FIFA have been very vocal about what they feel about it, and they have openly criticized the moves of FIFA. As my colleague will point out in a little bit, the principle of neutrality, it has been tested extremely rigorously. Again, because of the unprecedented circumstances we are currently living in, it is impossible to alienate football from the political landscape that it exists in. So, on paper, on paper, FIFA is answerable to its stakeholders, but practically speaking, it's pretty much answerable to the world. There's no other sporting body in the world with the amount of influence and power that FIFA has. That being said, the initial relocation of the Champions League final was merely a gesture. Let's be honest. Second of all, the rules that have been the rules regarding football contracts that have been suspended are also a knee-jerk reaction. Now, I understand that the FIFA, as my colleague has explained earlier, that FIFA did what they could on just and sound legal principles. But the fact is that these measures are all temporary, and they only last until when? Until the end of this month. Why? Why does it last until the 30th of this month? Will the war end on the 30th of this month? Even if the war ends today, it's going to be months, if not years, until Ukraine is able to sustain a league of its own. It has bigger fish to fry as we speak right now. Even if we consider the Russian national team, it was not suspended until other teams refused to play. In fact, they were allowed to play under a neutral flag, and they were allowed to play at a neutral location. So these are the concerns that I just had about the actions of FIFA. Just one more thing I'd like to mention about the whole concept of just cause to terminate a contract. One would believe that a sovereign invasion would be just cause enough to terminate a contract. But like I said, like my colleague has mentioned earlier, we live in a time where football cannot be separated from politics. And now that FIFA has given specific directions as to how the players go about this issue, there's definitely going to be a stackload of cases under the DRC, and then subsequently before CAS.
Thank you, Bart, for your opinion. As you pointed out correctly, the measures are only temporary. We're almost the end of June. So what's next? It's interesting. The Ukraine Federation announced that they would like to restart their Premier League, their competition, in the beginning of August. I think you don't believe it's possible at all. But what do you think then? What's next? What's the right thing to do now?
That's, of course, it's a very loaded question. I mean, I'm not from Ukraine or Russia, so it's very difficult for me to say what the right thing or the correct thing is to do. But as far as the starting of the league is concerned, the country has to emerge out of what it's been through right now. And I don't think that foreign players will want to come back and play in Ukraine anytime soon, considering some of them had to escape in secret on buses and boats. Imagine after 5 months being told that you have a contractual obligation to come back to a turmoil country where your safety really cannot be guaranteed. So I really believe that there are much bigger concerns than football to be addressed before we even think about starting a league again in this country.
To catch up with Part's argument, I agree that the safety of the players are really important. That's why I would suggest or recommend to extend the temporary measures, as well as we look at the tools which are given by the FIFA RSTP. We have the possibility to terminate a contract of just cause, Article 14 FIFA RSTP. However, the force majeure event is really restrictively applied by FIFA. I found one decision by CAS where the Egyptian civil war was considered as force majeure event. So we could apply this, and also if we look at Article 337 Swiss obligation law, then that we have to look at the circumstances if the parties can trust in good faith to hold on this contract. But if we think it through, if we allow to terminate a contract of just cause because of the war, we have players who are not able to work anymore. We have clubs without any players. We have the certainty that the contractual relationship is over, but I mean, the future is still unsure, as well as loan agreements is not really practical because we have also to consider private autonomy, and FIFA can't force, or Uefa can't force to enter into loan agreements. So to enable players to compete, to stay fit, I think the best option is to extend the temporary measures.
Yeah. I agree with you guys. I think it's too early to start the league again, but we must not forget about the clubs. They need a perspective to know what they can do to restart the league. And I think FIFA and Uefa have to take that in consideration while they are taking their decisions.
Okay. Thank you, Lottie. I think that's really interesting because, in fact, I think 5 teams out of Ukraine are planned to participate in the European competitions as well, starting next month. So indeed, they need some sort of perspective how it's going to go, and if they can compete in their national competition as well, which players are going to be available to play for their team. But as you pointed out, it's uncertain times, and it's not clear what will happen. So we'll have to wait and see what FIFA and Uefa will eventually decide, and we'll hope we'll have an update soon. But let's move on to the last topic now. Lotte, you really wanted to discuss the concept of neutrality as well. Could you briefly explain it, please?
Yes, the concept of neutrality in sport basically means that, it's the most fundamental principle of the global organization in sports. It means that it should be free of any political interference, because sport has a great power. It can foster peace despite a war is going on. And that's because sport should be about the performances of the athletes, and it's about promoting our international community. And as a consequence, international federations forbid athletes to speak up about political issues, but that entails significant restrictions on the athlete's freedom of expression. So that causes a certain tension between the neutrality and the freedom of an athlete.
So, do you feel that this principle now is under a bit of pressure? If you look at the things that are going on nowadays and the actions that people and federation and clubs are taking?
I think so, because the one-sided invasion of Russia can be considered as a crime against humanity, and the regulations of the International Federation also contain several articles about human rights to protect them. For example, Article 2B of the Uefa regulations. So the measures taken by FIFA and Uefa could be taken to protect their own regulation instead of seeking any political interference. So in that way, these measures can be justified. On the other hand, some sanctions are in line with the package of measures of political and economic nature, which are taken by the states to ban the Champions League from Russia, and to quit sponsorships, and to give the unilateral right to suspend a contract with a Russian employer. Are examples of sanction which have like a more punitive character instead of safety reasons only.
Thank you. But then going back to the principle of neutrality, I'm going to ask this question to the whole panel we have here. Do we think it's a bit outdated? Do we think it's not?
Quite frankly, I think at this point, because if we were to follow the principle of neutrality as per the letter of the law in black and white, it would be defeating its own purpose today. If Russia is allowed, and so is Ukraine for that matter, allowed to participate in international competitions, this would not be fostering political or any kind of benefit to anyone.
In my opinion, I think the principle of neutrality is handled too strictly. I mean, if we look at the Olympic Charter or FIFA regulations, we want to promote, or FIFA wants to promote, human rights, and that's why I think that we should enable athletes to peacefully protest for human rights and to show human rights violation. I mean, it's not an attack against the state, as well as we see like the FIFA decision is not something against Russia. It's to enable smooth competition and to, yeah, it affects Russia and Football Union Russia, but it's more about ensuring smooth competition and promote human rights.
But you can't alienate the political landscape from what's happening in sport anymore.
Yeah, with Teresa, I think there's no clean vision possible between political and sports. Like in the during the Olympic Games of 2021, athletes were allowed to protest racism. So I think the policy is going to change, but I also do think that careful policing is required to preserve the value of sponsors, and even more to ensure that the focus of each event remains on the sport and not rather than on any other political objective.
Okay, thank you all, members of the panel. And then I would like to open the floor for any further questions right now.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the last part of the question again? I mean, I would hope that we would someday have an objectively correct solution, but like we mentioned, there is way too much. There's way too many factors influencing what's happening right now with Russia and with the FIFA. And of course, Western politics has always played a big part in influencing how FIFA has decided to do certain things. But in this case, in the near future at least, as long as a sovereign country is being invaded, I think there are bigger questions to be answered than whether we're going to have football again or whether we're going to have an objective solution to football. I think the whole point of this panel is that what's happening in Ukraine is above football. It's more than what we have discussed in this class so far.
And considering the CAS decision, the CAS really looked at the opinion of Football Union Russian and FIFA, and the CAS panel looked at the balance of interest, likelihood of success, and also if there's an irreparable harm. And every point of looking through it was denied. So I think CAS decided fair, but I think the word fairness is wrong in a legal aspect, because in law we always decide through balance of interest. We have one opinion and another opinion, and we have to look, okay, what is proportional?
Thing that in the events that have transpired, the FIFA over the last 3 to 4 months, until there was a public outcry, all we had was a relocation of the final. Once there was a public outcry, there were suspensions, and only once the other national teams refused to play against the Russian team, was something done about the Russian national side as well. So I honestly, it's bleak, but I don't know if anytime soon we can see an objectively fair solution to this. A war, the moment there's a war involved, there's not going to be an objectively fair solution. Is what I believe.
Question, but in the Ukraine war, or in this case, we also have to consider that several associations declared that they are willing not to compete with or against Russia, and also 37 countries declared that they are in favor of the ban of the Russian Football Association. So I think there was a huge impact and also influence from the outside who was recognized by FIFA.
Thank you. I think this was an excellent panel. Congratulations. Applause. We need to make sure that the parents are watching, because they must be really proud of all of you, of course, but also this panel was excellent. Teresa, how did you know about Swiss Civil Code of Obligations, Article 300? Okay, the Egyptian case on force majeure. Okay, but you all did a very, very great job, so congratulations. Now we call the next panel, so gender equality. Ariadna, are you the moderator? Constanza, okay. For Constanza from Argentina. Yeah, those. Okay, so this is also a topic where there have been a lot of changes and news recently. It's also a topic which raises a lot of different opinions. Maybe we can also here at the end have some questions to the public. I don't know if our members of the panel thought about it, but then it's of course a topic that raises different opinions as to whether women and men, sports and football, how they should be treated, if they should be afforded equal pay, and so on. But recently, FIFA introduced some rules into the FIFA RSTP, especially to protect female players regarding maternity leave, etc. I sometimes have been asked questions about it, but it's a bit difficult for a practitioner to judge, because you honestly don't get to work a lot on these kind of topics. So personally, I've met some people working in women's sports, in football, female athletes, but we really, in my career, we really very rarely were confronted and questioned about legal issues involved in this. For example, what has been added in the IFA RSTP, which I find perfectly correct and agreeable, but in our case, we never had a chance to apply it. But Constanza,
Yeah.
word with you.
Well, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for being here and the ones following on Zoom. Our table will be about gender equality, and I would like first to introduce my panel here. They are both very experienced in the topic. So on the one hand, we have Andrew Werner. He's a Canadian Dutch lawyer, and he worked for the Canadian Soccer Players Association, and where he helped in the negotiation of the bargaining agreement for women's soccer with the federation. And moreover, he will be joining the World League Forum the next weeks, where one of the main objectives is to bring the Women's Football League into the organization. So he's very inside of the topic. And on the other side, I have Ariana Mendoza. I will say she's one of my role models. I'm very proud. She represents one of the things that we want to address here, that is the change. She was the first woman to be an in-house lawyer in a football club in Peru. So yeah, she worked for Melgar in Peru. And what we want to do here is to we don't want to give our personal opinion strictly, so we will be based all the information, because I know this is very controversial for some people. So we want to give facts, and we based our presentation on reports that were made by FIFPro, FIFA, and World League Forum, so almost all the stakeholders in football. And what we want to do is to divide in 3 parts. So first of all, we want to understand the background of the history of women football, because we believe that understanding the background will make us understand where are we standing right now. So our second part will be where are we now, all the changes that we are feeling right now, because there are a lot of new things going on. And our third part will be what things we can do to improve, because we have a lot more to keep going. So I will start with the first question that are for both of you. So our first part will be what things in the past were relevant at the point that they influence where are we now. So I don't know who wants to start.
I want to share a little bit of UK before World War I. The women's football was more famous than the men football. We have that in the World War I, when men were going to the war, women stay in the factories making weapons, making material supplier for the war. So the UK government was a little bit worried about the welfare of the health of the women working there, because they were really working with really huge stuff. Like they had a lot of pressure beside them, because it was really hard to work with the weapons in a really dangerous environment. And even that, they had like the pressure of the family that they were going to send to the war. So that's why the government asked to the owners of the factories to take care of the wealth, to the health of the women. So they thought that the football was a good idea. So each factory had a football team, a female football team that was really famous. We have like the most famous team had like 53,000 people at Woodson Park in what time, and also 14,000 people, potential spectators outside the stadium. And they reach a lot of money to charity reasons. So that's why the Premier League thought that the men's football was in danger, because the popularity and the spotlight that the women's football had in that moment. So the FI banned the mainstream women's football after consulting with experts of health, because they thought that it was not a good idea to have women playing football at that time. So that's why it was banned, also for political reasons. But now we see that the government bodies are the ones that are improvement, that want the female football to improve, and they are investing money and they are investing resources in making the golden era of women football great again. So that's why I wanted to share.
Ariana, well, now I want to ask the same question to Andrew.
Distinguished guests, panel members, thank you for having me here. I just wanted to extend my gratitude for having the opportunity to speak about gender equity in sport. So Ariadna gave a pretty interesting insight on the prehistoric development of women's football. You saw that in the UK, eventually it was more popular, women's football, post or pre World War. But I'm going to give you guys a bit of a roadmap, essentially, that talks about the first Women's World Cup officially hosted by FIFA and the development of how it changed in 2019, which was the World Cup hosted in France. In the first World Cup, which was hosted in China, the winner of that World Cup was the United States of America. This was an interesting World Cup because this World Cup, although it was hosted by FIFA, there was no revenue generation to FIFA, although this was their event that they were hosting. Another interesting aspect is that there was no broadcasting rights afforded to the competition. So although there was a Women's World Cup, which was a very good political move, there was an important footprint for social change. And in this time, the footprint for social change was obviously that the participation of women in football needed to be increased. So having looked at it from 1991, we're going to look at it from now 2019 and compare it thereafter. So in 2019, the World Cup was hosted, different from 1991, in France. But similarly, the World Cup was again won by the United States. This was the first World Cup where we have learned at the FIFA headquarters that FIFA finally broke even. And as a result, they received a surplus revenue from the Women's World Cup. And this indicates the following. FIFA always, before 2019, was receiving their main revenue from the Men's World Cup. But now, as you see in 2019, there's the ability of FIFA to create revenue in more options. And in that, you see that the Women's World Cup is a prime example of that. And directly associated to that is the broadcasting rights. In 2019, different from other World Cups, the Women's World Cup was afforded broadcasting rights from the association. And because of this, there was a new footprint for social change. And the footprint was as follows. The question that needed to be considered by football and its stakeholders were how to professionalize, promote, and develop the women's game further. So I looked at 1991, 2019, and you must be wondering, how did it change in between? So as you can see there are some figures which showed one of the main driving factors behind the development of women's football was collective bargaining, organization, and players associations associated with central contracts. So in this regard, I will break it down into three parts. In 2016, between 2016 and 2018, I like to call it the dawn of a new era. And in this, I talk about, or I would like to discuss how some national associations, particularly in South America and Europe, decided that the current structure isn't okay. So what did they do? These women's national teams decided to defy the system by protesting and going on strike. This was a good move forward because obviously, as you saw in 2019, the standards were not good enough for women. So these women were the pioneers in helping to develop the game through coming together and negotiating eventually their collective bargaining agreements. So from 2016 to 2018, you have this development. And pre-2019, almost around 2019, there was the establishment of many, many different players associations. And this is different from men's football because men's football, they're making enough money where they don't need to have to come together and negotiate collectively, although it's changing a little bit. But it was a driving factor which essentially developed the World Cup from 1991 in China to 2019, where you now see revenue being generated. Another aspect to discuss in the driving force behind women's development is the increased accessibility. Obviously, I mentioned in the World Cup in 2019, they were afforded broadcasting rights. So people like you and me were able to watch from all around the world, the Women's World Cup, Megan Rapinoe making her iconic celebration and obviously winning the Ballon d'Or. And lastly is a topic that I will go into a little bit later, women empowerment. Women investors who are not essentially conventional investors have been given the opportunity to invest in women's sport exclusively. This is an example that you will see in Angel City FC, a newly established football club in the National Women's Soccer League in the United States, where the likes of the actor Natalie Portman and Serena Williams decided to invest in a football structure solely and exclusively for women. So with that in mind, these are the three driving forces behind the development of women's football.
Thank you both for giving this background. Well, here in the screen, we are seeing a little bit of a timeline of the evolution. In this case, we are talking about when women leagues started. So I will just give an example of Argentina, that the League of Women's started in 1990, but it became professional in 2019. So we can see how 30 years of the league that is already settled and established, and even though in a few years ago they started to be professional. So, well, moving to the second part, we want to talk a little bit about the current situation. Where are we standing right now? There are a lot of changes going on with regulation, governance, programs. So we want to mention them. And I will start asking Andrew if you can explain us a little bit more about the governance and all these programs that are being developed.
Thank you, Connie. So from a governance perspective, I have to take this question and dissect it into three parts. From the player's perspective, I will discuss, then the association's perspective and the league's perspective. So first, from the player's perspective, this essentially are the incentives and the initiatives taken by players' associations at national level. And one of the main occurring themes is that players want to have a voice in the decision-making processes at national level. And I can give you an example at that. At the Canadian Soccer Association, when I was working for the Players Association, one of the regulations or the terms that we needed to negotiate was the allowance of one player, male and female, retired or current player, needing to be having a seat on the board of directors to be a part of the decision-making process at national level. Yeah, this is an important thing because players are at the core of football and their voices need to be heard. They essentially understand how football needs to develop from the player's perspective, and it's important for them to have the voice in those decision-making bodies. From the association perspective, well, we can all agree that I think there has been an inherent acceptance that men's football and women's football are fundamentally different. So we could start there. But what does this mean? This means that new bodies need to be established, that is to say, need to be established for women exclusively because they're the ones who will understand how women's football is supposed to be promoted and operated in practice. And in the FIFA women's strategy, you see that they proposed a women's football department, which is essentially a department that focuses on the development of promotion of football, women's football around the world. And different confederations such as CONCACAF, Uefa, and the OFC have followed suit in creating their own women's department, solely focused on ensuring that women's football grows and is promoted at a great and substantive level. Lastly is the league's perspective, and this is done through three different approaches. Yeah, at league level, one of the main issues is how to develop women's football for club competitions. And one of the ways in which this is done is the federation integrated model, where the national federation steps in, invests, and oversees the development of women's football from the league's perspective. This is done predominantly in the Netherlands and Germany. The second one is the men's league integrated model. So, for example, big teams like Real Madrid, Barcelona, Chelsea, that have a lot of investments going in, they've decided to decentralize the investments from just the men's football into the women's football as well. And this has allowed a structure to be expanded in that regard. The last one is the independent league model, which is one that I alluded to earlier with the Angel City FC model, where football clubs have been developed strictly through females or unconventional investors investing exclusively in women's football and having nothing to do with men's football at all. And this is predominantly seen in the USA and the National Women's Soccer League, where a lot of teams are being established by unconventional investors, which is allowing, exclusive football structures to be created.
To Andrew, I would like to ask Ari if you have anything to add about this.
Yes, about governance, I would like to share with you about the quotas the FIFA once had implemented in the statutes. About the FIFA's women's football strategy, they changed the statutes in the main part of the composition, election of president and vice president of the council. So now Article 33 says that the members of each confederation must ensure that they elect at least one female member to the council. In the event that no female is elected, the seats reserved for a female will be deemed forfeit by all members of such confederation and shall remain vacant until the next election of the member of the council. Now we have here a quota that has to be fulfilled for the member associations by FIFA. But we also have Infantino saying the following words that I would like to share with you this afternoon. If you allow me, I will do it here. It's better here without the audio and not with the video, or I can read it anyway. So it says, this is Infantino in the Women's Football Convention in 2019. He says, you put one woman in and it changed immediately. You can have 50 men, you put one woman in the room, it changed completely the atmosphere. Everyone is more polite, everyone is smiling a little bit more, everyone wants to be nice. Involve women in whatever you do and you will be happy because everyone has a smile. When a woman is in the room, it's automatic, it's normal. So in one hand, you have that they want FIFA to make a democratized decision-making process with women involved. But in the other hand, you have Infantino saying that they want just women because it makes the environment nicer and the decision-making process easier and more friendly environment for everyone. So you have that thing in mind. So we have to decide what we really want here. If we want quotas for make a better process in the decision-making, or we want just to follow the trend that now it's make woman part of the environment that was men related before. So that's what I wanted to share with you.
Thank you, Ari. I want to add some things, information about commercialization, basically about sponsors and public attendance. That are two topics very relevant in football. So here we can see the difference between the sponsors between the men's World Cup and the women's World Cup. So there are a lot of difference. Of course, there are more sponsors in men's, but anyway, we are seeing a change, and this is has been said by the World League Forum in the report that nowadays sponsors are changing and are moving into women's football and investing a lot of money there. So we are in the process to change, and I want to share an example of my country in Argentina. Well, some years ago, they used to promote, for example, the kids of women's football. They use models instead of using the actual football players. This was a revolution, of course, and now they change, and in the main when they publicize the kids and the new shirts, they use both women and men actual players to promote the shirts and not models. So I think we are seeing a change in this sense. And also with public attendance, we have seen this last year. Well, they started with the World Cup. The most attended World Cup was in 2015 in Canada. But recently we have two amazing cases that are with the Camp Nou in Barcelona. We had the derby between Barcelona and Real Madrid, and also we have the semi-final of the Champions League, Women's Champions League. They both broke the record of 91,553 million people attending to a match. So this sorry. This shows a big change. And I think that if you allow that the female team plays in the Camp Nou, you can see how a lot of people go and see the match. So yeah, these are two numbers that I wanted to share with you. And now talking about regulations, Well, we have seen a lot of new changes that were introduced in the RSTP, for example. So Andrew, if you want to start.
Yeah, of course. So speaking about the RSTP, I'm going to touch upon the concept of training compensation, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. But for those of you who don't understand the concept of training compensation, I will explain it briefly. Training compensation is essentially the compensation afforded to a training club for developing a player once he signs his professional contract or he reaches a certain age. Now, if you look at Article 20 of the RSTP, which defines training compensation, you will see in the last sentence the following. The principles of training compensation shall not apply to women's football. I think if we're talking about professionalization of any league, men, female, trans, black, white, yellow, the first thing you need to start with is from the bottom. And what do I mean by that? From the bottom, players need to be invested in, and they need to have a return of investment from the big clubs. And for FIFA to say very blatantly that they're not going to afford women training compensation, that inherently indicates that FIFA is not ready to professionalize women's football, irrespective of the initiatives taken. So, in my opinion, what needs to change is that FIFA needs to allow training compensation for women's football. Why? Because if you look at sport and the concept of sport, which is a construct that comes from all over the world, but has been defined in European jurisprudence, one of the main things that falls within the specificity of sport is the sporting pyramid. And what is the sporting pyramid? The sporting pyramid starts from the top at the federation and includes, with solidarity mechanisms, people, stakeholders, leagues, clubs, players in that pyramid. So the essence of the specificity of sport is that the sport itself, in this case football, is solidified from the bottom to the top. And if FIFA doesn't allow for solidarity of that nature to be applied in practice in women's football, how can football ever develop from a professionalization perspective for women? That's just my opinion on the training compensation and just something for you guys to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Ariana, you want to introduce a little bit more of this?
Yes, two little comments about the RSTP about the female players. We have like when the club breaks the contract with the female player because, or it's presumptive to being related to being or becoming pregnant during its term, maternity leave, or utilizing rights related to maternity in general, we have that the club has to pay a compensation to the female player, but also the FIFA is going to impose sporting sanctions to the club that breaks the contract to the player. So here we have like if a club does it, it's going to ban to register the international or national players for 2 transfer windows. I think this is not good for the football teams, because if we want the development of the leagues, of the female leagues, and we want the improvement of the sports, the female football, we need the transfer window to be open to everyone. So if we impose a sanction, this kind of sanction to a little clubs, female clubs that are just growing, I think will be not good for the whole league that where they take place. And also we have like if a female it gets pregnant during the contract, she can continue practicing football, continue training if he has the check of the doctor, but also if she doesn't want to continue playing or training, she can decide to do an alternative job inside the club. So if the female player doesn't want to work, or the doctor says that she cannot work, the club it's mandatory to the club to give her another job inside the club, and the club has to pay her the same amount like she was playing like as a professional player. So here we have like this is not good for the clubs neither, because you have to pay to a professional player that is not working as a professional player, is working doing something else, and you can have like I don't know if it's fair for the other players that are really working, are really playing, are really competing, paying another player doing another thing, maybe just training little girls the same amount or even a more amount. So that was the comment of the RCP.
Okay, thank you so much. So moving on the third question that we have, the how can we improve it, because we still have a lot to go. We want to mention some recommendations that were made by FIFPro, FIFA, and World League Forum, and also give a personal opinion about this. So Andrew, if you want to start.
Yeah, so in this discussion, I think there's three fundamental aspects that need to be discussed. First is that of governance. Secondly is synergies. And the last is promoting a healthy culture. From a governance perspective, there needs to be a focused approach. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that irrespective of whether a league is being developed independently of men, there needs to be a focused approach on how to develop women's football exclusively. Women's football is something, as we've both understood, it's not men's football. It's something that's fundamentally different. And as a result, you need to have different actors coming in and developing the game because they may better understand it. And what does this mean? This means two things. First, economic independence. And this is something that you've seen in the National Women's Soccer League with the example of Angel City FC. You've given this club the economic independence to establish themselves with only women. And I think it's doing all right for itself. The second one is to share best practices or specific expertise. And this is something that you're seeing at the FA Women's Super League in the UK, where both the Women's Super League and the Premier League sit on the board of the FA, but have exclusive power to make decisions in their respective leagues. What this allows is that the Premier League, which is arguably the best sports league in the world, is allowed now to share practices with the FA Women's Super League on how they can eventually promote and develop themselves for the better. Secondly is synergies. Synergies means that essentially organizations need to come together and ensure, like I said, best practices. This is of fundamental importance because it's clear that men's football is one of, if not the biggest sport in the world. And there's reasons for that. There's people investing, there's good business people, lawyers, accountants, all these sorts of people putting their life's work into men's football. So I think with these practices, you can apply them, or if you apply them into women's football, you will have a similar approach, maybe not as huge, but you will have a similar approach to the success level. And the last thing is promoting a healthy culture. And this is a bit of a sensitive issue for a lot of people because I know there's a stigma around women's football. Women are not as strong, the net is too big, they're not as fast, they're not as smart, all these sorts of things. But this is an unhealthy stigma. These are tools being used to prevent the development of women's football. So what needs to change? The way we think needs to change. And why? Because football has a purpose, and the essence of football is to bring people together, irrespective of their cultural background, the color of their skin, or their gender identification. So with that said, these are the three most important things for the future of women's football. And I think if these things are rigorously applied by the different institutions and stakeholders in football, women's football will be on a very healthy pathway for sustainable growth.
Thank you, Andrew. Ari?
Thank you, Connie. I have to say, like, being a woman into sports has been hard. It's not going to be easier anyway. But I actually think that all the videos, all the reports, all the documents, all the amendments to the RCP looks really nice when you look at it. So we think that FIFA is doing a great job inside FIFA, but actually I think that there's a lot of bias, as Andrew said. There's a lot of bias. There's a lot of people that doesn't want to look female football as a really good show, as a really good sport, because it is, now it is. And also, I think that if we our experiences inside a decision-making process or inside an organization where you have even women or men doing almost the same thing, I think you will have a better solution to all the problems that you have into your company, into the club, into the organization. I think if we bring different opinions, doesn't matter if we are from women or from men, we will have better solutions, and also we will have different approaches to a problem that maybe we think that doesn't have a solution if we look it in just one way. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. The last thing that I want to add is that we are not, even though the presentation is named gender equality, what we are claiming is equity. So we want, we ask for the same opportunities. We don't want a copy paste of the men's league and take it into the women's league and apply the same. We know that we are different because we are different, but we want the same opportunities. And that's what we wanted to address today. So thank you so much. And if anyone has a question, please. Yeah.
Thank you for your question. I think this is not necessarily a footballing issue. I think this is a social issue, and it comes down to education. With that said, there are a lot of people who have not been properly educated on the concept of gender equity or gender equality. Similarly, racism is also an issue where people have not been educated on. And I think the foundational issue for this issue and also for racism is that it comes down to education. States, countries, ministers of education need to understand that education, educating your youth, educating your older, educating people who come from your country need to understand the concept that a woman, just because she was a woman, doesn't mean she's lesser than. She's a woman, and that's great. It needs to be celebrated, right? So, and in the context of football, like I said, and I'll keep alluding to it, women's football and men's football are completely different constructs. And instead of, talking negatively about women's football, the difference of women's football needs to be celebrated. And I think, that's pretty much the opinion I have for that question.
To it, I think that you will have anyway different kind of spectacles to see, because actually in Latin America you have people that doesn't like Latin American football at all. So you have, for them, you have European football, you have American football, you have different kind of spectacles to watch. So if we are never gonna make everyone likes everything. So if you don't like women football, it's okay, but I think you just have to respect that it's a good thing. It's making people work because female players are working there. It's a spectacle that maybe some people will like and some people will not. So I think that's the same thing. If you want to watch it, you can watch it. If you don't, you just have to respect it. That's it.
Thank you. What is your name? Lauren. Okay, excellent question. What is your name as well? Guillaume. So I also had this question in mind, and I would like to hear our perspective also, because I think you said you were working or advising the Canadian players. Was it players union, female, both? Okay, because there is this issue with whether from the players' perspective, because at the end of the day, training compensation, it is true that it is an incentive to train players, but at the same time, it is somehow an obstacle to freedom of movement of players, because then the new club will have to pay a certain amount. So I think that maybe, since you gave your opinion, maybe you had already some insights also on the players' perspective, because you were involved on the side of the player. But then maybe we can also hear from them.
First of all, thank you for your question, Lorenzo. Back to my point that I brought up in the beginning, there needs to be an understanding that men's football and women's football are fundamentally different. What does that mean? That means that training compensation, although it is a construct that's been established and accommodated for the men's side, that doesn't mean that another regime cannot be implemented and applied for the women's side in a different context, I think. Yeah, in training compensation, it's an incentive, like you indicated, for lower clubs, smaller clubs to develop these players. But on the other side of that, it's also a solidarity mechanism to allow everybody to be a part of the European sports model, or the efficient sports model, if you will, for developing, professionalizing, and sustainable growth. So I think because the men have demonstrated that training compensation as a solidarity approach has been very good in practice, that doesn't mean to say that it's impossible to apply in women's football. But the first thing you need to understand is that women's football is different. So a different training compensation regime would need to be established, developed, and then applied thereafter.
That FIFA wants for the female football, because they are also implementing like licensing programs inside the leagues. So they want all of these environment of football, of female football, like being really professional now. That's why we have compensation in case of termination without just cause. That's why we have even fines in these cases. So I think that what FIFA wants is really improve all the measures that they have to professionalize the female football. But I think that in that sense, it has to be harmonized. So if we are imposing sanctions and fines and compensation for this kind of termination without just cause, we also, I think it's proper to consider solidarity mechanism and training compensation.
I will agree with you, Lorenzo. I think they have both strong points, but maybe it's better to go a little bit more like in this way to keep improving a lot of things, and maybe it will be better to wait a little bit more. So yeah, thank you for your question. That's why we focus our presentation in football, because we believe that each sports have different ways, and football is one of the sports where we see this bigger difference between women and men. But yeah, I agree that in some sports and in some countries they are more developed with women's sport. So yeah, basically that's why we focus our thing in why in football is so different, because it should be as the other sports that they are more similar, I think.
I think also just to point out quickly from the WNBA's perspective, and I don't know much about the American football, but those are two American models. And in those American models, you have a closed league structure where investment, no matter what, if the money is coming in, the teams will be there. And I mean, even if you look at Major League Soccer as an example for football, it failed 2-3 times before it became what it is today. And it's the fastest growing, arguably, if not the fastest growing sports league in the world. So yeah, just like the NWSL, it's something that failed a few times, of course, because investment maybe wasn't good enough. And now we're on the third try and the NWSL is taking off like never before, unprecedented growth in football. And yeah, I think maybe football was a little late to the game, but as the biggest sport in the world, irrespective of whether it was late or on time, it's going to learn how to adapt to the market and eventually grow from there.
Football is really traditional also. It's really male play. You can see guys playing football everywhere, like in the streets, whatever, but it's not the same thing for women. So it's really traditional. I think it's in the main court, in the main heart of it, it has really traditional background. So I think that's why we are a little bit late in there. That's it.
Thank you. Cabano, you had a question as well, or?
Hello. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for your question, and I think it makes perfect sense, and it's a good question. I mean, why doesn't FIFA impose regulation to ensure that men and women on the international level are being paid equally? That's a question, really, quite frankly, I don't have the answer for, unfortunately. FIFA makes a lot of decisions by itself, although there are stakeholders involved in its decision-making process. Not necessarily are they always involved, and sometimes this happens for the national associations as well. And as you saw within the charts, in between 2016 and 2018, there was a lot of different women's football teams at the international level who weren't happy with the conditions. And what they did was they went on strike. What a different approach that could have been taken is FIFA could have enacted legislation, but maybe that sometimes makes too much sense for FIFA to do, I think. And they left the power to the women to make these decisions. So now you have this phenomenon where female athletes have the responsibility to negotiate their collective bargaining agreements, but not only does it allow for better working conditions, but it allows them to work towards the road to equal pay. And it's not just something that's happening in Spain or in England, it's also something that's happening in, well, obviously we know the US as well, South America, it's predominantly happening. And yeah, I think there's also a clear distinction to be made in this regard to equal payment for equal play at the international level, where it's strictly performance-based, and at the club and national level, because those are two different conversations. At the international level, you're representing your country, you're trying to win them the World Cup on equal standing, whether you're a man or a woman. So I think because of that, if you're a woman or a man, you perform well, you win gold, you should win the same amount of compensation. But at national level, leagues level, it's clear that the women's leagues are still developing, and to say that women should be getting paid the same amount as men at the club competition level, it's a bit extreme right now. But in the end, like I said, if you share best practices and ensure that the women's game continues to grow, this is something that can be able to allow for some women to make playing professional football a career instead of a second job or something that they enjoy because of passion. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think it was another very excellent panel. We learned a lot of things. Very well presented, guys. Congratulations. Maybe just a small remark on the presentation. I think that PowerPoints are, as I said yesterday, they have to be able to give you more. I think it was done well, but there was a slide with like a lot of information. And from the audience perspective, that's not really something you can read. So maybe it would have been better to have that was a bit more resumed. And maybe when you quote the articles, maybe it would have been interesting to have them there to read. But apart from that, which are just details, it was an excellent presentation with a lot of things that we learned. So congratulations. So now, Eugenio, you are the moderator of the I think it's the 11th panel, so dispute resolution system in football. Very interesting topic. Gentlemen, please moderate the tone, please. So now let's see what Jacopo, Javier, Dimitri, and Eugenio will discuss, probably about the FIFA dispute resolution system or CAS, national dispute resolution system. So with the word, Eugenio, welcome.
Okay, perfect. Good evening, everyone. My name is Eugenio Corsi, and I am an aspiring sports lawyer, as basically every one of you. And today I have the honor of moderating a roundtable entitled "A Flawed Ecosystem: Dispute Resolution Systems in Football." In this discussion, I'm happy to introduce to you the three outstanding panelists who will explain us the topic. I'll go by alphabetical order. Jacopo Bonzi, on my left, is an Italian qualified lawyer. He's expert in both in litigation and civil law, as well as sports law. Xavier Lopez Hervas, a lawyer practicing in Spain, who is expert in immigration law and sports law. And finally, on my right, Dmitry Morozov, a Canadian qualified barrister and solicitor, expert in both arbitration and sports law. Now, as for what concerns the topic, as we all know, dispute resolution football is something not as fancy as other things that have been discussed in the last 2 days, but for sure is a topic of paramount importance for both sports lawyers and aspiring ones. It is a very complex topic because, as we know, jurisdiction and competence can vary depending on the country, the subject of the dispute, and whether or not there is an international dimension to said dispute, and also due to the national laws, as we will see. For all this reason, the first topic we'll touch upon will deal with will be of a comparative nature. We will examine employment disputes in football in Italy, in Spain, and lastly in Canada. The second theme that we will try to address is a more complex one, and is the one of independence of arbitration. And lastly, we will speak about the accessibility of the arbitration instrument. So, having said that, I leave the floor to the three experts that surrounds me. And so, Jacopo, what can you tell us about dispute resolution and employment law in football in Italy?
Thank you, Eugenio. Hi, everyone. So I will try to give you an overview about the system of the labor disputes in Italian football. So first of all, the arbitration, how does it work in Italy in general? We have a provision in our procedural civil code, is the article 806, that provided that the parties can defer their disputes in front of arbitrators only if the object of the dispute is an available right. And on the second paragraph of this norm, we have the specific provision for the labor disputes. So these kind of disputes can be decided by arbitrators only if the law allows that, or if it is provided by contracts and collective bargaining agreements. So what does it happen in Italian football? In Italian football, we have the trade union of footballers, AIC, Associazione Italiana Calciatori. They have made a collective bargaining agreement with the Lega Serie A and Lega Serie B and Lega Serie C. That is the three, substantially the three leagues of the Italian professional football, because the rules applied just for professionals, not for amateurs. So in this collective bargaining agreement, this agreement provided that all the controversy, the disputes between Italian or stranger, but foreign footballers, it depends, but if they are playing in Serie A, Serie B, or Serie C, they must go to Collegio Arbitrale, that is, and let's call it the Italian DRC, that is quite easier. So how does it work? This system is a pretty fast system, because after the appointment of the arbitrators, the arbitrators have to decide the dispute in no later than 60 days. So it's very fast. And in some cases, especially urgent cases, so let's think about, for example, a player that has been suspended by trainings from in team. In these cases, the time can be halved. What is the, let's call it, the issue of this kind of arbitration? So the decision of the Italian DRC, similar to the FIFA DRC and different to CAS, is an irritual decision, because in Italy we have these two different types of arbitration: the ritual arbitration and irritual. What is the difference? The ritual arbitration, the decision of ritual arbitration is same as a decision of a tribunal. The ritual one he has like a contractual effectiveness, so it cannot be enforced, for example, through the New York Convention. The second issue of this is that these decisions are not appealable, basically, because they are appealable only in some cases, and the appeal will be held to the labor courts in Italy, but only if, for example, the arbitration clause is invalid, or if there was an error on the appointment of the arbitrator. So it's quite strange. So this is the big issue. The decisions are, from one point of view, we have a very fast process. From the other point of view, it's very difficult to enforce this decision. So this is, I think, is the main problem that we have. But later, when I'm gonna compare this system with the FIFA one, we'll see that maybe this issue is like just a formal issue, not a very substantial one. And lastly, to conclude, another important thing: this rule, this collective bargaining agreement, applies only for the players. So coaches and sporting directors, for example, they are not subject of these collective bargaining agreements. So basically, if they have a dispute with an Italian club, they have to go to the Italian courts. And I promise you that the proceeding in front of an Italian court will be very long. Some years ago, we have, just to give you an example, guys, the former Lazio coach, Vladimir Petkovic, he has been fired, and he is proceeding in front of the Italian courts last 5 years. So not 60 days as would have been for a player. So this is an issue, in my opinion. So I think coaches and sporting directors, like everyone involved in football, should be applied the same rules.
Thank you, Jacopo. And now we'll move forward with Spain and with Xavi.
Thanks, Eugenio. First of all, I must mention that the employment disputes between professional players, football players, and clubs in Spain are governed by the Royal Decree 1006/1985. What means that it's a public law and out of all federation regulations. Why is that in Spain? Because in Spain, till now, sports is seen as something of public nature, and that's why public courts, public governing bodies will be in charge of the sport. The Article 19 of this Royal Decree says the following: Disputes arising between professional sportsmen and women and their clubs or sports entities as a consequence of the employment contract shall under the jurisdiction of the labor courts. In other words, arbitration is forbidden for Spanish employment disputes. What happens? We have to take into account what FIFA RSTP says in its Article 22B, that players and clubs might defer their disputes to national DRCs or arbitrary tribunals, whatever the name it is. What happens? That this royal decree mentions that are labor courts, therefore no national DRCs. Actually, because of this law, there are no national DRCs in Spain, or at least they are not used. This extent it's confirmed by CAS in its resolutions 3896 between Elias Mendes Trinidad versus Atletico Madrid, in which the athlete was trying to take the case before FIFA, arguing that FIFA doesn't only allows to take this dispute before national DRC. What CAS said was that these regulations, the national regulations, were compatible with that article because, of course, national courts fulfill all the requirements of FIFA. Therefore, national courts will be responsible for the resolution of these conflicts. In conclusion, it's clear that for Spanish players who have a dispute with Spanish clubs, first of all, FIFA won't take the jurisdiction because it's not an international matter. But as said before, there are no national DRCs. But my question for you is, what do you think about the international players? Because it's clear that between international players and Spanish clubs, there's the international component. What do you think about it? Someone can answer for that? Lorenzo, please. Okay, I totally agree with your opinion, but what we find in this situation is that the federational and La Liga, in this case, contract templates include automatically the reference to the royal decree. So CAS accepts that this reference is an acceptance of national jurisdiction of Spain. This is what we have. Therefore, FIFA cannot take the case because, as said before, this national dispute resolution is accepted by CAS and therefore by FIFA. Yeah.
If the same situation, instead of being in Spain, which, I mean, if I have to go before a court of Madrid or Barcelona, I would feel rather comfortable. But in a different type, I don't know, I would say some country of Middle East, or like, what do you think if some, let's say, we had many cases in Saudi Arabia, with no offense for anyone, but we also represent some Saudi Arabian clubs, and there are a lot of cases there. And normally those cases are brought before FIFA and CAS, and where, let's say, international players feel quite confident and protected. What do you think could be the approach of FIFA and CAS if, let's say, Saudi Arabian law had an identical type of clause or clause included in the standard contract or in the national law?
Leave, and I hope that they give the same answer, because if they didn't give the same answer, I mean, there wouldn't be a unification of the criteria. So I guess that they should give the same answer without taking into account the country. In my opinion, as I said to Lorenzo, I don't agree with this. And actually, if there's an international matter, FIFA tribunals, football tribunal in general, and DRC specifically should take the case. But I mean, as it happens in that they are signing those contracts, and therefore they are accepting this situation. I think there's no much FIFA can do.
Quoted before CAS involving Atletico Madrid, was it? Or do you know if the player and the club had signed an employment contract? Do you know if they had agreed to Spanish labor law jurisdiction, or if they had included? Because we had cases. I mean, you can include, even in a contract in Spain, FIFA and CAS as jurisdiction. And the question is, if you go to FIFA and say to FIFA, look, parties have agreed that the competence is FIFA and CAS, do you know if in that case that happened, or they had agreed on jurisdiction on Spanish labor courts, or they said nothing?
We find a problem that first of all, the template will include this reference to the real degree. Even though, if, in my opinion, if all apart from that, there would be a mention to accepting the FIFA jurisdiction and CAS also. I think that FIFA should take the case because it's international matter, sport, of course. So I think they should take the case. But we will find two problems with those clauses, in my opinion. First of all, will be enforcement. That, as the royal decree says, what it says, it would be impossible to enforce it here because it would be contrary to public policy. That's clear. And another problem I find is that if one of the parties goes to national court before going to FIFA, national courts will have to take the case for sure. And if national courts take the case first, what will FIFA do? That they cannot take the case again. So in that case, one of the parties is if it's interested, probably the Spanish club, to go to national courts if they are faster than the player. I think that the player cannot do anything, in my opinion. For this point, that's everything I wanted to say. Yeah, I wanted to finish my argument with the professor's question. That is that, in my opinion, nowadays we have ways to enforce arbitral decisions of FIFA and CAS by the disciplinary committee of FIFA, and therefore, if the parties agree and they go to FIFA and they forget about national courts, and if the decision must be enforced, they can. FIFA nowadays has the tools to enforce that decision. So I think that in case of international players with a Spanish club, they can be taken before FIFA, and therefore CAS.
If I may, just a final point, for me, a good loophole could be in the case of course, in Spain, because it's easier to go to higher courts and to question the fact that on the point of right of access to justice, maybe, because basically you are forcing a person to have while there is in place the FIFA regulations and so on for other countries, you are forcing an employer in the European Union, so also under the European Convention of Human Rights, to have basically a trial under laws that it is not due to comprehend. So what could be a good loophole for me, and this is just my opinion and it may be wrong, but what I would say is that probably this is the best way to harmonize things. And in fact, another opinion of mine is basically that both the systems of Italy and Spain are flowed on different ways, because in Italy there is arbitration, in Spain there is not. But still, for me, in the scope of harmonizing the dispute resolution systems at least in Europe, but for me it should be done all over the world, a good idea would be to fall under the same umbrella, because basically all these kind of systems work under the same scope. But that's just my point of view on that. Dimitri, could you please touch upon really fastly on the dispute resolution system in Canada, and then we'll move on with the second topic.
Thank you very much, Eugenia. Yeah, in Canada, they have the Sports Dispute Resolution Center of Canada for all the sports, and Canada Soccer Association. All the statutes of Canada Soccer are falling under the umbrella of FIFA. So disciplinary committee, appeal committee, ethics, and so on. And it specifically says in the Canada Soccer Code that if there is a discrepancy between Canadian articles and the FIFA regulation prevails. So I think in this regard, Canada, but it's a small market in soccer yet. So they're trying to fill into the umbrella with the universal and predictable dispute resolution in football, at least.
Perfect. Thank you very much for this information. And now I think that we can move on to the second topic, which is basically the independence of arbitration in sports. Dimitri, would you like to start on that?
So actually, this topic would naturally fall from your previous discussion with the CAS and FIFA DRC. CAS as the ultimate authority in sports judiciary, if you may say this. And I think there's a lot of questions to CAS, and specifically when we talk about CAS independence of CAS, because this is a twofold issue. First one is that from the governance perspective, CAS is governed by the ICAS, the International Council of Arbitration for Sport, which is its members are nominated mostly by the IOC, national and international federations. So there is if we use the psychological term, in-group favoritism, clearly from the perspective of nomination. Then these members approving the closed arbitration list. In international arbitration, let's say ICC, International Chamber of Commerce, there's no closed list. Why there is a closed list? Why they're super arbitrators, they called it, like when the 35% of arbitrators are deciding more than 80% of the CAS cases. I don't think it's a coincidence. It's designed this way. So when the CAS was created in 1984, it was created under auspices of IOC. So the CAS jurisprudence and the way CAS operates, and even the CAS code, are all kind of, I mean, this is an academic discussion, right? So it's all created to make it, if you wish, one streamliner and protecting the interest of sport as a general rule. Unfortunately, if we look again at the jurisprudence, the majority of disputes are won by the federations or big sports organizations, and athletes are suffering. Coming from continue the topic of independence, and I think the next issue that is really related to this is the transparency. I already touched a bit on the list of closed a list of arbitrators, and transparency is very important because CAS is the sports international judiciary. Why we don't see the majority of the decisions online in 2022? I think this question also this issue begs another reference to the power of arbitrators and the power of director general, who can advise the arbitrators, and who, according to the CAS code, he receives, before the award is signed, it shall be transmitted to the CAS Director General, who may make rectifications of pure form and may also draw the attention of the panel to the fundamental issues of principle. For me, this is really strange, to put it mildly, because arbitrators are grown-ups, right? They're established lawyers. Then they can write their decisions. Director General gives them advice. What do you think, guys? Or any audience, I encourage you to say something. No, it's okay. The thing is that this provision of the CAS code is very peculiar, because also the CAS code provides that the operative part of the decision should be published within 3 months, right? 244 days, according to the research, is an average. And many arbitrators are saying that these written decisions are laying on the Director General table. I mean, he has a lot of work. Maybe he needs some help, right? I don't know. But like, really, this is a multi-billion industry sport. This is the governing body on it from the judicial perspective. This is...
Here, there was a panel that somebody mentioned Mathieu Raja. So he is the secretary, CAS Secretary General, whom he's speaking.
Yeah.
Is Mathieu. So something very interesting as well in this regard is provisional measures. I don't know if you looked into it, but in many cases is one of the most delicate issues, because it's really very difficult to get a very quick award, and then you have to get relief on provisional measures. Well, we've mentioned, for example, doping cases yesterday, or even right now the cases of Russia.
I was about to say this.
At the end of the day, it's normally well, I'll let you the word and to address.
No. It's just the thing that the way the CAS applies the provisional measures is really picking and choosing. There's no consistency. Sometimes they apply one approach, and they, let's say with Russia, they don't give them provisional measures. And then the other, there was an example when there was a football game. I'm not a football person, so maybe Lorenzo can help me, but I think it was Atletico Madrid, right? When the provisional measures basically killed the whole thing of sanctions, and they were applied, and it's like, it's a consistency. You can do, I think from the legal perspective, the jurisprudence is striving to be consistent, and that's what the international arbitration is praised for, that it's faster, private, confidential, which is another issue with CAS, because sometimes it's confidential, sometimes it's not. It's like, it looks like it's picking and choosing by someone who is behind the scene of CAS. I think so.
You know, what Dimitri said, when we're preparing this table, I told him once that for me, there's a huge difference as for this topic of independence between ordinary and appeal cases. Why? Because ordinary cases are between two private sides, which I guess that there's no other interest inside the tribunal. But it's true that in appeal cases, we have an appeal coming from international federation. And I think that according to what you are saying, when it comes from international federation, CAS might have some interest on helping those federations and coming together with their decisions.
Exactly, Shabby, thank you. The issue with the appeals, when in international arbitration, two parties choose one arbitrator each, right? And in CAS provides with the president. Just in an appeal procedure, right? We've been in Lausanne and we asked the head of arbitration at CAS, why is it so? And the answer was, oh, we want to secure basically the sports, that the arbitrators are aware of the sporting industry and protect the sports in general, which is in line with ICAS formation, with the closed list of arbitration, with non-transparency of this. So it's all kind of consistent, but in a negative way.
I think that we spoke a lot about this kind of stuff. We maybe rapidly address the last point, which is the accessibility of arbitration due to the cost. So, do you want to start, Jacopo?
Okay. So, accessibility of arbitration is one of the main issues I think we have, because usually arbitration is quite expensive. So, to give you a comparison between the Italian DRC that I was mentioning before and the FIFA DRC and CAS. So actually in the Italian DRC, the fees for the arbitrator actually are not that high. So it seems very accessible. But to give you an example, if the value reaches like 100,000 euros, the fee for the arbitrators is like upon 4,000 euros split between the three arbitrators. Whereas if there is a sole arbitrator, the fee will be 1,000 and 7,500. So I think it's quite accessible. We can say that also if you go to court in Italy, you have just to pay, of course, your lawyer, hopefully. And you just have to pay a tax that is called contributo unificato, that is not very, it's like not a very high sum to pay. This is for the Collegio Arbitrale Serie A. For the lower leagues in Italy, the fees are lower. So as the clubs and the players gain less money, I think it's quite fair. But at FIFA, we have no fees. So if there is a player and coach involved, there are no fees. So I think it's really, really, really fair. I don't know what you think about these guys. What do you think about the accessibility, the fees? In CAS, we know the fees are quite high. We're going to go through that in a minute. So if someone wants to share your opinion, what do you think? Should be always free for you if a player or a coach will be involved, or Lorenzo?
Okay, I
wanted to say just one incident with regards to cost, because the costs are very, very important in litigation and arbitration. And in CAS, the Play the Game website obtained a document concerning a recent case where FIFA's opponent was an athlete. And the letter from CAS court office states, I must, however, inform you that as a general rule, FIFA does not advance costs when it is a party to a CAS proceeding, which is acceptable to CAS pursuant to Article 64.2 of the code. This is basically enforcing the leverage of one party, which is already the giant, and the athlete is
bit delicate as well. It is practically a standard practice of CAS. Then you have to look at what is the case, because, for example, if it's the so-called horizontal case, is where you have player against player, club against club, and sometimes these parties like appeal against FIFA. And the truth is that basically all that FIFA wants is to be excluded from that case, because they are a sort of, they are the first instance. And in a normal court, they wouldn't be there in appeal. They wouldn't have to pay the cost. So if they're always involved and they always pay the costs in that type of case, I mean, they don't really have an interest in the matter unless it's in disciplinary cases. And it's a different matter. But then normally they pay the cost. In some cases, they are cost free as well. Like international disciplinary cases, they are cost free.
right.
So I don't know if taking that it's not always because FIFA doesn't pay the cost. In my opinion, it's wrong.
But they can make a provision for this specific situation in the code. The ICAS, which shall gather at least once a year to do something, we don't know exactly what, and approve it. Why don't they? That's a procedural matter. Very easy, 2 paragraphs. Here we go.
Xavi, do you want to close it out?
Close our roundtable with the accessibility to arbitration in Spain. First of all, there's no arbitration at the moment, so it's not. My point is not about accessibility. In this moment, they are discussing in the Congress the new Ley del Deporte or sports law in Spain, which will provide that disciplinary matters will be taken from public law tribunals, so administrative law tribunals, to civil court tribunals. What means, if you remember, I started my exposition telling that in Spain, sports is a public matter and it's protected by public governing bodies, public courts. If we are changing this perception of sport and taking them to civil courts, we are changing the whole matter. I know it's disciplinary matters only, but with this new law, apart from going to civil courts, the door for arbitration will also be open. What if this change comes also to the employment disputes? I think that is opening the door for a new situation in Spain. So maybe in a near future, if this law it's finished, that at the moment doesn't exist, but if it ends up being like this, we will have the possibility to go to arbitration also in Spain, which I think it's a huge change in the industry. To end up, after this point that opens the door to arbitration, I wanted to mention what Eugenio said before. That is what I totally agree with. We started building our system from the top, that is CAS, more or less. But we have a lot of situations in different countries. In my opinion, following what Eugenio said, we should have arbitrary tribunals in all the countries, national DRCs, we can call them however we want, but that allow appeals too. I know it doesn't exist at the moment, but maybe inside football, we could have a national DRC with appeals to FIFA and FIFA appeals to CAS, so that we have a 3-instance pyramid. I know it doesn't exist, that it's very difficult to create, but in my opinion, the same that happens in each country with different instances, for me, this would be ideal. And for that, we need changes such as this one that I'm mentioning now.
Yeah.
Thank you all for your attention. If you have any further question, don't refrain from asking. Otherwise, we'll give the floor to the next roundtable. Thank you.
So do you guys have any question? No? Okay. So I want to congratulate this panel. I'm really feeling, guys, we have to change the name of this Congress. It's not Students' Congress. really professional as Congress because the level is extremely high of every panel. As Eugenio said at the beginning, this was also a technical and a difficult topic, but I think that you also brought it in a very interesting manner, comparing various systems and then also addressing the international, how these interacts with the international part and what are the pros and cons of every national system and also the international one. So I think it was, and I think that many of you must already have some experience in the field because I hear a lot of comments and insights of people that normally are used to work in the industry. So congratulations. I hope also the guys' mothers and fathers are watching because they also deserve it. So now we go for the break, I think, before the two last panels. How long are we going to take it? Like 30 minutes or less? 20 then. 20. Spanish 20s or Brazilian 20 or British 20? Spanish 20 minutes. Okay. Thank you.
are talking about all the things in the first question. After we are going to repeat the same. It's kind of what we need.
Put it on. Trust. Okay. Trust. Do you hear it? Do you hear it like this? Trust. 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 Oh, I'm sorry, you were taking.
Hello. Okay, guys. So welcome back. Now we are at the 12th panel on minors, which will be moderated by Guillaume. So I give you the word.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy that you all survived the break. And I'm sure that you woke up this morning very excited for the second day of this convention, especially because we're going to talk about minors, which is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting topics in sports law. I'm delighted to be joined by Abbas Qasim, Carlos Lopez, and Alvaro Arias. And today we're going to have a discussion, I hope a very vivid discussion about the legal framework concerning the international transfer of minors. And I'm going to kick this roundtable off with a quote of Mr. Arsène Wenger. Mbappe has African roots, but was trained in Europe. If he'd been born in Cameroon, he wouldn't have become the striker he is today. There's Europe and there's the rest of the world. The latter needs help. Otherwise, we are going to miss a great deal of talent. And it's not the first time we've been hearing experts and professionals who are active in the football world expressing their opinion on minors, development of minors, transfers of minors. We've been hearing a lot of critique on the current legal framework established by FIFA in Article 19 of the FIFA RSTP. People have been saying that it's outdated, that it's in need of an urgent reform, that it's not adapted to modern football. And I would like to invite my panelists to share their opinions on this reaction in the football world.
Thank you, Mr. Matisse, for inviting us to this panel. Thank you, Mr. Stefano, for this opportunity. To start, the concept behind regulation around minors is protection. Article 19 of FIFA RSTP is not titled transfer of minors, it's titled protection of minors. This article established as a general rule that an international transfer of player cannot take place only if the player is at least 18 years old. So in my opinion, this overprotection, this exaggeration of the protection of minors can cause a loss of opportunities to the minors to achieve their dreams and their goals to be soccer players and support their family. So in my opinion, FIFA has to do like a balance, a conciliation between protecting the minors and allowing liberty to pursue professional development.
Would like to share their opinion.
Certainly, yeah. First of all, Guillaume, I want to thank you for inviting me on this panel. I was working very hard on in my villa in Fiji last week when I got your call, and I'm very happy that that you invited me to come over here. It's a very interesting topic. It's a topic that me having South American roots I find fascinating. The quote that you mentioned is especially powerful because it's true. Europe is an advantage from a footballing perspective, without a doubt, and the rest of the world is trying to catch up. And while we look at the infrastructure in Europe and compare it to some of the other footballing infrastructures, specifically looking at South America, they're the largest exporter of footballers in the world, and we compare that and contrast that with the prohibition on the transfer of minors. What I can safely say is that unfortunately, what really ends up happening is rather than protecting the minors, you're stifling their opportunity. I think of players like Alexis Sanchez, who made his professional debut at the age of 16. Sergio Aguero debuted professionally at the age of 15 in Argentina. Maradona was 15. Lionel Messi signed a contract with Barcelona at the age of 14. So I want to think, what would have happened if rules had been enforced like these when Messi was registering and transferring to a different continent? Would Messi even exist? Knowing that, for example, he was a player who needed expensive hormone therapy treatment, he looked for it in avenues within his country. He went to Boca, he went to River, looking for a club that could sign him, that could pay for his treatment, and ultimately he ended up in Europe because it was the only place that could pay for his treatment. So I think just starting off, it's the protection of minors is a beautiful concept, but we have to make sure that the regulations that we make are actually fulfilling the purpose that we purpose them to have.
Okay. Hello. First of all, I want to thank you, my dear moderator, to invite me for this table, and hope you enjoy this discussion. Following Carlos' argument, I'm agree that there is a need to create a balance between the protection of minors. That is the most important thing, obviously, but after to provide opportunities to a lot of young people that is trying to reach their dream and improve their lives and their family lives. So, like everything in life, things change. So football 20 years ago was so much different. Because examples like Messi, Maradona, Aguero are small exceptions, because it was so weird to see a football player of 16, 17 years old playing in first division. But nowadays, it's completely different, because the players that are governing football right now, Mbappe, Haaland, Pedri, Ansu Fati, Vinicius, they start becoming the stars when they are still minors. So what we have to do is to adapt the rules to the actual football, to create this balance between the protection of the minors and the opportunities to create these talents.
Well, thank you. Very interesting. And I would actually want to dive deeper in to what Carlos you said about the continent of Europe being in an advantage when you compare it to other continents in the world. There is, well, the most known exception to the transfer prohibition is the EU or the EEA rule that allows transfers within the territory of the European Union or the European Economic Area. And recent CAS jurisprudence also expanded the application of this article to all players with European nationality. And this exception is the consequence of negotiations between the European Commission and FIFA after the famous Bosman case, where FIFA actually had to give in to the European Commission that they had to respect European law principles, respect the freedom of movement. But can't we argue that this exception, which is favoring European nationals or transfers or European clubs, that this is somehow discriminatory towards other continents?
Well, yeah, if I could start, number one, I'm happy to die on my sword here and say that the exception is extremely discriminatory to non-Europeans and is extremely Eurocentric. And I'm happy to take an extremely partisan position on that. And I mean, first and foremost, the regulation, the exception to the prohibition of minors is for 16-year-olds who are European within Europe and are transferring internationally to another European state. After then, we get the case of the famous Vada case, which essentially was a case that went before CAS that read in an expanded exception, being, as you mentioned, that if you are European entering Europe internationally, then you can also transfer from 16 years to 18 years old. What happens? Well, now we create a completely imbalanced market where what happens is European clubs can benefit from a larger pool of talent, which is players who are 16 to 17 across the entire continent of Europe, and they can bring those European players to their facilities to train. The expanded extension under the VADA case essentially makes any European citizen able to do that. So what happens now, which is a very prevalent thing in South America, is there's a lot of citizens who are Argentinian or Brazilian or anywhere else in South America that have dual citizenship due to their ancestry, whether it's Italian or Spanish. So we see the advantage that these players gain over their counterparts. If you're training at the academy of River Plate or Flamengo, and you just so happen to have an Italian passport, at the age of 16, you can make the jump into European football, provided, of course, that you're talented enough to do so. Meanwhile, your friends, your teammates who are exactly the same as you, maybe talent-wise, are just missing a document. And because of that document, they're completely excluded from the European market.
Would limit their development and their opportunities in the end, of course.
Absolutely.
Right. Yes, but I have to say this, like being a European myself, and I'm not in favor of the European preferential treatment in any way, but the regulations is a mere consequence of just the involvement of the European Commission and the European Court of Justice in the Bosman case, of course, that they say, look, you have to respect European rules. But in my opinion, it's quite stunning, actually, because there are a lot of other international treaties. I'm thinking about Mercosur, for example, who assure the same freedom of movement for players, for workers, starting from 16 years old. Why do you think that FIFA did not adapt its rules earlier to other international treaties, which are as important as the European treaties?
Like you were just mentioned, for me, the problem is not the European obsession to do this international transfer of minors, because it's based on the treaty on functioning of Europe, the Article 45 of freedom of movement of the employees around Europe, and the Article 20, the right to freely reside around all Europe. But complying a few requirements like giving academic formation and all of these easy ones to comply. But the problem is that FIFA just recognized this one for Europe, like Mercosur or the agreement on reciprocal hiring of workers between Brazil and Portugal that establishes that foreign players shall have the same rights, labor rights or obligations than the other employees of the signing state. And in for example, Argentina and Brazil, the minimum age to sign an employment contract is 16, like the majority of the European countries. So where we have to put the focus is why having kind of the same regulations in Europe and in South America or other parts of the world, why FIFA just recognize Europe and forget about the other ones. Because this thing is generating discriminatory situation, not just between the clubs. That is obvious. If you're European club, for example, Real Madrid or Barcelona, you can sign from 16 to 18 any kind of player within Europe with any kind of problem. But what happened if a player of Argentina, he wants to join a team a club in Chile? He can't, just because FIFA just recognized the European treaty and not the Mercosur, for example. And this situation creates too an equal treatment between players too, because after VADA case, CAS recognized that if a player is out of Europe, but he has European nationality or citizenship, he can move from out of Europe to Europe. So if you're imagine two players in a team, you have two nationalities. One of these is European. You are going to be able to move to another team. What does it mean? More rights, more opportunities. So it's not fair at all. So we have to extend this exception to the other continents. That would be normal, or just eliminate and create another system. But you can just recognize Europe and not the other ones, because FIFA's objective mainly are the equal treatment, avoid discriminatory situations, and with that, it seems that they just care about the European club's interest.
Well, I think we can all agree on the fact that the current framework is indeed discriminatory and in favor of European clubs. And I heard an interesting point that you mentioned, like, do we have to extend the EU rule to other continents? Would it be a good option, for example, to lower the current age limit, which is at 18, to 16, and maybe adjust the conditions to each continent, for example? Because I can imagine that transfers within Europe have different needs than transfers coming, for example, from players in Africa, Asia, whatever continent it may be. Do you think that would be a more adequate solution to the discriminatory framework that is in place right now?
Yeah, first, I want to totally agree with Alvaro and Carlos, what they said. But I want to add a point that not only the players benefits from this exception, but also the clubs are benefits from that, because they can catch at 16 years old, if the players, they can catch the good player. It's an advantage for this club. About your question, I am from Arab country. This thing will totally change in our country. We have to do that, because now in my opinion, Arab country, for example, don't compete in the World Cup because of that. Our ambition is to be in the World Cup only. We can't compete. If we give the opportunity to minors player in Arab country to travel when they are young, to travel and achieve their dreams, to be a professional players, this change in Arab country, in South America, in Africa, it's not by coincidence, guys, that Africa and Arab country and Asia don't compete in the World Cup. It's all started by the minors.
Just to clarify, you're basically saying that in every other region than Europe, and especially in the Middle East, when you're from Lebanon, for example, some good clubs, for example, in Oman, Jordan, they cannot recruit players younger than 18 in other surrounding countries. That would be a problem, right?
Yeah, we can do that. Like in Europe, for example. In Europe, the player can be at age of 16 to move. We can do that in Asia, for example. A player from Lebanon to go to Emirates, to go to Qatar.
Yes, that's actually a problem that I see as well. For example, when you have a talented 16-year-old player from Lebanon who could be the next Messi, he's crushing YouTube videos, whatever. And if you compare that to a player who's 15, 16 years old in Europe with European nationality, he will have the possibility to go to a club, Bayern München, Dortmund, whatever, maybe a second division club in Germany, Belgium, and make bigger steps in his development to become, in the end, an asset for his national team, than the player coming from Middle East, for example, and being limited to his own country until the age of 18. It would create a significant difference in competence and skill, because basically, in the end, the player from the Middle East is 2 years behind on training, right? So would it maybe be a possibility then to allow transfers within a certain confederation or continent? Would that be then a better solution?
So I think the issue of the solution is a really interesting one. And when we kind of talked about this earlier between us, we came up with a lot of different possibilities. Certainly one of, because at the end of the day, there is an issue here, which the general purpose of this prohibition is to protect minors. And I don't think anybody here is against the protection of minors by any means. And there is the harsh reality that there are some clubs that take advantage of minor players. There was a roundtable discussion yesterday dealing with the exportation of African players into Europe and what happens to them when they get there. The same thing happens in South America. You have big clubs that come in, they offer you beautiful academy training, amazing trials, huge money payouts if you get signed, maybe even jobs for your parents. And then you get there and you didn't play how you were supposed to, or because they're trying hundreds of other young players, they don't sign you and you can get stranded there. In some cases, players land up on the street. They could get involved in crime. They're far removed from their homeland. So there's definitely a balance that has to be struck. And that was also discussed in an earlier roundtable. It's the law is about finding balances. And in my opinion, it's about the balance of the protection of minors while also not stifling their opportunities. So ensuring that, the nefarious clubs, so to speak, can't get away with, abusing the power relationship that they have over minors, while at the same time giving the elite players or any good player the opportunity to make that jump into international football or international transfers, to play in international competitions, maybe in countries where they wouldn't have that opportunity in their own home country. So certainly one of the great options that we discussed is, well, let's make this fair. So if you can move around within Europe, let's do the same in South America. Let's do the same in Africa. Let's do the same in Asia, North America. And then that way, at least we give players a chance to look for bigger clubs within their continent. Some might say that's not enough. So there's also the other great solution that you propose, which is to lower the age altogether from this blanket prohibition to 16. And more than anything, I think it's important to give these players these opportunities, but we do have to protect them. So maybe it's more about having a significantly more robust way of protecting the minors, of ensuring that clubs are actually providing them with education, with proper services. If you promise a young child from Africa that he can come here and train, well, if it turns out that you don't sign him, maybe you give him an avenue to get back home to his family. So there's certainly a lot of possibilities.
Yes, just to pick up on that, I think that is a great option to have the clubs to have more responsibility over the way they deal with minors. But I can imagine that would include a lot of efforts by FIFA and the confederations and the federations, financial investments, greater monitoring. Like, how will you control, for example, let's say FIFA implements a rule that allows a club to sign 2 or 3 players from outside of the European Union, like a European club. But certain conditions have to be fulfilled. For example, even stronger conditions that there are established now. I can imagine that for FIFA, they would include a lot of financial investments, hiring new employees, monitoring the situations, having to review reports, this and that. Do you think that FIFA is ready or willing to make such investments or efforts?
For sure, if we want to protect the interests of the minors, as one of the most important things in FIFA, and is one of the FIFA's objective, it means money, work, and huge effort. It's obviously so. For me, there are 2 different options. As I mentioned before, or extend the European exception to all the confederational continents and apply the same, so to be fair and everybody would be in the same conditions, or just eliminate that and allow transfers from 16 to 18, internationally, but always complying with strong requirements and not the ones that are, for example, in the RSTP, that are obvious, that has to be complied. So in this situation would be more like a case-by-case method. I know that is more difficult, but nothing in life and in football is easy. So if we want to take it seriously, we have to maybe opt for this kind of options. So you have to take it seriously, for sure. And if one of the main ideas that we have to do is just put strictly rules, and at the end of the day, we know that with really strong rules or strong sanctions, most of the most powerful teams of the world they are trying and always looking for gaps. And we could see Chelsea, Madrid, Barcelona, and put a more stronger sanction of them, and not just monetary sanction, more like just sporty one. And maybe later we're going to discuss about that. But the most important thing is an equal regulation for everybody, because without that, I think it's kind of impossible.
Yes, I agree, and I would like to pick up on the sanctions that are to be applied on clubs. It's not the first time that we see clubs being sanctioned by FIFA for not living up or complying with the regulations concerning minors. We have Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid, Barcelona, and in 2019 Chelsea, and now in 2021, 2022 also Italian club Spezia. All clubs who did not comply with the registration requirements of minors at their academies. And I would like to dive deeper into the Chelsea case, because I think it's an interesting one, where Chelsea was convicted and imposed a fine and transfer ban for not registering trial players at their academy. So there were young minor players who were giving trial matches at the academy of Chelsea, wearing the Chelsea kit, the badge, everything. Do you think that also for these kind of trial periods, which is a custom in England, clubs should be fined for not living up to that registration requirement?
So again, I think it's a matter of balancing interests. I think, you know, it's about understanding that players need to have opportunities, especially young players coming from other parts of the world, certainly, because the harsh reality again is that sometimes the players are coming from horrendous situations. You know, just to give anecdotal examples, Carlos Tevez comes from one of the most dangerous villas in Buenos Aires, and he says to this day that his best friend who grew up with him was a better player than him, but he died by gunshot on the street. So we're talking about giving players opportunities, and what happens when you make such strict regulations is, for example, in the case of trials, as you're saying, is, well, then maybe these players won't even get trial opportunities, because, you know, and this kind of ties in with Article 5 of the RSTP that says for any player, amateur or professional, to play organized football under any sporting entity, they have to be registered. And now this has been extended to trial players. And I think it's an overextension personally, because again, we need to be able to give players avenues, especially players who are coming from these kinds of situations. And I have friends. I have one really good friend in Canada who, when he was about 16, he did trials at Celtic for about 3 weeks. He had he had the idea of signing there, but he knew it was a long shot. But he took the chance because it was available to him. And, you know, and if we have such strict enforcement regulations regarding registration of players, and then on top of that, you know, the registration of players is limited by this prohibition on minors, you cut out a large market for players that are aspiring to become better athletes and to, you know, make it big in the sport.
Yeah, but here also I agree with you, of course, Carlos. But here I think we have to talk also about the category of the club. For example, if a club is in the first or second category, that means that a club can provide training facilities to their players to be in a good health, a good structure, and also to give them education, not only to be a player, but also a human. That's in my opinion. Yeah. What do you think?
Following your argument, I know that most of the times it's hard and it's difficult to these maybe smaller club, but we are talking that minors and the protection of the minors is a priority. So, and we talk that is about, it takes money, time, work. So if we want to protect and improve the situation, you have to do things, and you're going to sacrifice another ones, like, you know. But I think that sometimes when we talk about the protection of the minors, we make a mistake, and we try to put the minors like in a bubble and prohibit everything about them. And I think it is more like to regulate better, because one thing is to protect the minors and the other thing is to eliminate and provide opportunities to some people that maybe obviously their dream is to become a really good football player, but at the same time is sometimes the last opportunity or the only thing that they can do to have a better life in maybe another country for the families too. So create I know obviously it's difficult, but create a good balance between giving opportunities to them and taking care of them. For example, one of the most sad things that happen is that if a player goes to maybe another country, another continent or whatever, and he goes there for 2-3 weeks to prove and to try to reach the opportunity and be part of the team, and the club thinks that he's not good enough, and they doesn't want to come with him. They leave him alone, and they don't care. No, we have to put the attention there. We have to create rules that at least ensure to the family and to the player protection. I mean, if you go there and you try and you're not good enough, the club must pay the flight to go back home, or provide, if the player is going to be there, a good accommodation, look for a good school, control if he's going to class in the academic role, because they're minors, they are growing up. So that is very important. So no just think about protection of the minors, prohibit everything about it. No, it's just more try to look for the best solution, and not always the best solution is to say, until you're 18, you can move.
And just to add to that, I think you're right on point, Alvaro, because there's no denying that there's some academies in Europe that are world renowned for the facilities, for the education they provide to their players. La Masia in Barcelona, La Fábrica in Real Madrid. There's youth academies that are highly developed in the English Premier League. So it's not to say that we should carpet ban all minors from getting opportunities. I think that's ridiculous, frankly, considering that we know that there's facilities that can house them safely with clubs that are well intentioned. So that's certainly the best way to go about it, rather than just carpet prohibiting the transfers of minors internationally.
A last thing, and this is also by which I would like to conclude this discussion. In all the cases before FIFA and CAS regarding Real Madrid, Barcelona, Atletico, we saw that the Spanish Football Federation, the national federation, was also fined because the clubs did not live up to their registration requirements. Do we think that it could be a good idea to switch the responsibility, or lay even more responsibility on the national federation regarding how clubs treat minors, and how they maybe even the confederations that have to regulate the transfer of the minor more in detail?
I think that's one of the main things that we learned from the cases with the Spanish clubs in particular. And just to get kind of an idea, just rough numbers that I wrote down. In the case of Barcelona, there was 31 minors that were investigated. In the case of Real Madrid, it was 70. And Atletico, it was 221 over the course of about 7 years. But one of the things that we did learn from those cases, from the jurisprudence at CAS, is exactly that the national associations are also responsible for ensuring that the clubs within their associations are abiding by the registration requirements, are abiding by the transfer requirements, and they're following the regulations. So certainly, and that ties back into your earlier question, is FIFA ready for this kind of increased infrastructure? Whether they are or aren't, I don't think is necessarily an important, but certainly an important question. But we know that we can rely on the national associations to kind of pull their weight on this. We know that we can rely on them to enforce regulations, to make sure that the clubs that are registered under them are complying with the regulations. So if we do change the regulations, to maybe strike a better balance that we're talking about, we can certainly rely on the national associations to do their part to ensure that minors continue to be protected.
Anyone else would like to add something to this?
About sanction. What, for example, Barcelona was the first team sanctioned in 2013, Atletico Madrid 2014, Real Madrid 2015, Chelsea, and now Spezia. What FIFA can do other than banned, for example, from registration to 2 periods, two consecutive periods, and amount, there is nothing. So I don't agree with you, Carlos, because it's really hard now. Okay, I know it's after 20 years, but it's hard now to change the rule. What the sanction will be, for example?
Following your argument, for me, we have to focus on not just, but sporting sanctions, because most of the times the clubs that make these acts or these breaches of RSTP are the biggest clubs in Europe or in the world. So if you put them a fine of 500,000, just imagine Al Khelaifi with a 500,000 fine. Do you think he's going to care about? No. Or Barcelona, Madrid. So if we talk about economic fines, put it seriously, okay? Or going to sporting sanctions. For example, the ban of registering players for 2-3 periods, I think is a really good one, because now in the football that we have nowadays, each year we can see a really talented young player that is coming. One year was Haaland, after Joao Felix, after so if you have to stay 2 years without signing any talented player or another old player, whatever, it's not that you're not gonna sign him. Your opponents are going to sign him. Or another one, for example, the subtraction of points in national leagues, because if Real Madrid makes a breach of this minor regulation and a part of maybe an economic sanction, you say you have 5 points less for the next league. Maybe because of these 5 points, they are not going to win the championship, or you are not able to play European competition. Because if we were talking about protecting minors and taking seriously, we have to do really important things, not just, okay, 500,000 fine, and after 1 year of ban registering players, that you go to the committee and maybe just the fine. No. So serious topics, serious sanctions.
Thank you so much. I think with this being said, we can conclude this discussion. If anyone in the public has any questions, we would be happy to answer them. I think it's better to use the mic, because I saw some comments on YouTube that yeah.
Yeah, guys, thank you. Really appreciate it. Personally, I'm sure that this round table will help me in my job. So really brilliant. Just one thing, Carlos, you said it was very Eurocentric, and you're totally right. And what is funny is that European clubs, they are not happy about this, because the European club who wants to transfer a player who's 16, 17, coming from Africa, from America, it's also a problem. So, I mean, European clubs are not happy about that. Just have a question and an idea, because most of the time, the clubs, they want to circumvent this regulation, this famous Article 19, knowing that maybe they will be reformed. But how could we circumvent this regulation and to make a deal of a player of 16, 17 coming from Nigeria, from Buenos Aires, or from another places? And thank you again for the brilliant presentation.
I love these kinds of questions, because you've essentially just asked me, how do we break the law? Thank you for your question. Well, that's you've touched on an important point as well, that no matter what the regulations are, there's always going to be clubs that are trying to circumvent them. That's why we see major clubs in Europe like Real Madrid, Barcelona, Chelsea, Atletico get hit with sanctions. In terms of what the best way to circumvent the rules are, I mean, firstly, underlining it with the fact that the best way to circumvent the rules is to make rules that are better so that we don't have to circumvent them, which would be some of the suggestions that we've already offered. If I was trying to sign minors for my club internationally, I would look at ways to complement the other exceptions that already exist. So we know that if, for example, your family moves to a new country for work that's not related to football, your son or daughter, women's football as well, can play, right? If they move for education, they can play. That's not related to football. If they're refugees, they can play. So if I was a club that was trying to circumvent the rules, colloquially speaking, I'd say try to offer his dad a job at the mechanic down the street, and see if you can bring him that way. There's lots of ways to do it, I think, and clubs have been doing it for a long time. I haven't really specifically looked at, the detailed intricacies of it, but I think for sure it's certainly possible. And I think because it's possible, it's better to make the rules better, right? Because if we know that the rules are going to be circumvented anyway, then let's make this a legal avenue that affords protection, right?
Yes, I would maybe like to build on that. We've seen in many catch jurisprudence that clubs are already trying and failing to circumvent the rules a lot, because FIFA, they always say, oh, the protection of the minor is the first thing we need to protect. They have a very strict approach to parents' rule, EU exception, all the other exceptions for minors, because they really want to protect the minor from child trafficking, economic exploitation, this and that. And the threshold to, for example, what Carlos said, offer him a job at the mechanic, it's very difficult, because with the way a transfer of minor works is that you file your submission to TMS, FIFA looks over it, they dive deep because they know clubs want to circumvent the rules. So they really hunt after, like, okay, what could be the slightest link of a club or slightest indication of a club? Oh, this seems a bit sketchy. Yeah, we're gonna disallow the transfer. But also in the suggestions that were or in the new rules that were suggested here on this panel, there is room for circumventing the rules, for example, because let's say we switch the whole transfer policy and we say, okay, transfers within a confederation is possible. Let's say, let's take Asia. There is a guy from Thailand who is very talented, moves to India, and then at 16 years old, for example, European clubs know that transfers from 16 to 18 within the confederation is allowed. They will start to build partnerships. For example, it's just an idea that I have. Let's say Chelsea, oh, okay, we know we're going to have a partnership with a very strong club in India, a very strong club anywhere else in that confederation or in that continent, to pick up the player when he's 18. So they basically can scout players in one continent, for example, Thailand, say, okay, this is a very good player, send a profile to the Indian club, and then the Indian club transfer it back to Chelsea. Of course, you have to check into TPO, TPI stuff on that, of course, but still it would set the door open for such kind of relationships and circumventing the rules as well.
I mean, maybe not directly, but there's no denying that big organizations like Citigroup, who have clubs all over the world, Red Bull, who has clubs all over the world, there's many of them. There's obvious reasons for this, and it's to get access to larger talent pools. Whether it's necessarily circumventing specific regulations, no, but will it make it easier? Absolutely.
Why I personally strongly in favor of lowering the transfer age to 16 within the continent, but that comes hand in hand with FIFA carrying more responsibility on monitoring the whole transfer policy of one confederation or one continent. And if that can happen on a very controlled basis, I think it is the next step in modern football, because we cannot longer rely on a system which was designed in 2001 and which is clearly benefiting one part of the world. And FIFA is a promotion of world football. So I think it speaks for itself.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. Was really comprehensive, clear, concise. So thank you. My question is in regards to the topic of discrimination, particularly the European Union restriction.
The way I see it, it's a bit of an opposite approach, but as it is right now, you could see that the biggest exportation for European or for transfers within Europe come from South America and some other places outside of Europe. But essentially, the current landscape right now is that in South America, there's no established leagues, or there are established leagues, but there's nothing compared to how things are in Europe. So yes, it's discriminatory, this regulation for minors and stuff, but it's also a mechanism which I believe is being used to help develop these areas better. Maybe you disagree with me, but if this regulation and restriction wasn't put in, I think every player from all over the world would be coming to Europe. And that poses not only an issue to accessibility, but also that's a huge immigration crisis, which Europe is already suffering from. So bearing that in mind, I wanted to get your guys' opinion or thoughts on.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. Very, very interesting. That is why this panel suggested to lower the age from 16 within a continent, because if, for example, a very talented Chilean player gets to move to the first league in Brazil, it would be good for the Brazilian league as well. And it's not moving to Europe or any other country in the world. So you're basically focusing on one continent. That would lead to an improvement of that one continent, which would lead to an improvement of the national teams of that one continent, and which in the end, in my opinion, would benefit world football as well. So I think it would be a good balance between, on the one side, allowing 16-year-old players to seek better development, because that's what it's all about. Basically, if you're allowing a transfer within a confederation to a better club, you seek better development for the player. And on the other hand, protecting the minor from already taking a huge step in his career from the age of 16 years old, moving to the other side of the world. So I think with that that new rule or suggestion, I think that you would have a good balance between those two interests.
Just to follow up, so it's inherent that essentially you are in favor or opposed to the European restriction?
We're not opposed to the European exception. What at the very least I can speak for myself, I'm opposed to the fact that the exception is only for Europeans, that only Europeans get to take advantage of moving earlier. And a couple of other points too is, one, there's certainly very well established leagues, at the very least in South America. Some exceptional international tournaments are being played down there. Some of the national leagues are huge with massive followings. It's not a term. I don't think it's an issue of organization of leagues. I think it's more of, at the very least, I can say personally, when I'm watching, my club River Plate, when I watch the young guys come through the academies and get into the first squad, and then I see the interest from Europe, I think, man, that's amazing. These guys are going to go to Europe. They're going to compete against the best in Europe, and that's going to make them stronger when then they come and win the World Cup in Qatar in December, right? So it's an issue of access to competition. It's an issue of having access to a market that, for some reason, with these regulations, only Europeans get. And I think that's what I'm against. Is it's an issue of equal treatment more than anything.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I think the European exception is really positive, because it's not casual that that Europe have these. The best leagues, the most talented top level football, is because this kind of mechanism helps everybody in Europe. Obviously, more to the best and biggest team, but the thing is that only is for Europe. So if we create this in, for example, South America, and everybody could move from Ecuador to Chile to Brazil and in Asia the same, we could, maybe not now, but in a few years, trying to adapt more the level, because now, as Arsene Wenger or I think everybody agree, football is Europe and the rest of the world. So if we want to make a balance and just not create the mentality or the opinion that, if I want to be a really good football player, I have to be in Europe. If I don't go to Europe, so or just eliminate this exception and put the from 16 to 18 to allow international transfer with certain requirements, or put the European exception worldwide to any kind of confederation.
I understand your concerns, Andrew, because exactly it would lead to one, a high increase in transfers all over the world, because you're basically allowing minors to basically clubs allowing to recruit players at 16 years old within a continent. That would undoubtedly lead to double, triple, quadruple maybe in international transfers. And secondly, indeed, it would lead to a huge immigration in football as well. But that is why it's only a suggestion, of course. It would take a lot of effort for FIFA to implement this suggestion as well. A lot of studies, reports. So, but I think it's the right direction, because the current framework undoubtedly needs to change, because undoubtedly is discriminatory and in favor of the European continent.
Football's a global sport. Let's keep it international.
Yeah, I would like to give an opinion and then a question. The opinion is that I don't think that the level of the non-European leagues is lower than the European leagues, because there's no allowed the transfer of minors between that countries. I think that it would be allowed it. I think that the level would be lower anyway. I don't know if you disagree with this.
Why Bundesliga, Liga Santander, Premier League are obviously the most powerful leagues? Because for them, it's like going to the supermarket. There is a really good player in Austria, I take it. In I don't know, Finland, I take it. But in South America, you can't do it. If you're, I mean, you need if you're from the Brazilian league, you need that the player has to play there, and you can go to the Argentinian league, to the league from Ecuador, to Chile. But here in Europe, obviously the economic situation is one of the other that makes the difference for sure. But with the FIFA regulation, Bayern Munich, Madrid, Barcelona, they can sign any kind of player that is playing in Europe. There are a lot of leagues, a lot of nationalities. So if you give them not just the financial power, but this exception too, I think the balance is impossible to reach. Never.
I mean, agree or disagree with me. We'll make it fluid. But for example, I would argue that probably the most competitive league in the world is the Premier League. You might agree or disagree with me. You could pick another league. I would also argue that it's not because of English players that the Premier League is the best league in the world. It's because they have players from everywhere and they can afford to bring them. And bringing players into a competition of that caliber inevitably will make them better. So as a result, giving minors access to better leagues will make them better, is my opinion. And letting other leagues bring in talented minors from other countries will increase the level of those leagues as well.
One thing is minors, and another thing is the example of the Premier League, that now they sign players for millions of pounds. It's different things. The transfer of minors and the transfer of players.
So, tries to point out is at 16, a player is not fully developed to play in the first team. Well, you have some players, of course, but what he's trying to say, and that was maybe even before Brexit, because you have to take Brexit into account as well for the Premier League, but Manchester United, Chelsea, Arsenal, even second league teams, they were able to transfer a player from over Europe. For example, how many Belgian players have we seen going to Manchester City, Manchester United, and if they make it or not doesn't matter, but they have the possibility to do so, while other clubs and other leagues in the world don't. So I think that's the thing what Carlos tries to point out.
Do it also, but I just give the opinion that if they could do it, they wouldn't reach the level of the European leagues just because of more things that, for example, the economic development of the country. Means that, for example, in Brazil, I think that each club can only have 5 players out of Brazil, I think, in their squad. So if you put that kind of rules, also
another thing
work
that
for it.
Brazilian clubs can't do is transfer any minors from out of the country into their clubs, which is something that the European clubs can do.
Or circumstances that altogether make that finally the level of, so the
Yeah, opinion. We're talking on specifically on the issue of minors, and I think the collateral effect, if we improve these regulations, would be to increase the level of national leagues in other parts of the world, and also allow for smaller countries to increase the level of their natural talent. I think at the very least, that's the crux of my argument.
And FIFA to take responsibility and giving everyone a fair framework, because right now it's not.
I think Jaime, they're probably they're not saying that these measures would be enough to make the leagues the same level, but they are. I think because indeed, I think that it's interesting actually that all the panel more or less agrees on the same position after you studied the topic. But yeah, probably, I mean, there is a variety. What they are saying probably is that, of course, there are a variety of factors that make the difference between the leagues, but they are pointing to one specific aspect, not, of course, would be not enough to wouldn't by itself make all the leagues be at the same level. But I think the reasoning makes sense, indeed, that those leagues are allowed a wider access to players, and also for the players themselves, it's a chance to, at an earlier age, go and have better training conditions. So, but I get your point that it's not. I mean, it's not a measure that by itself would make the league at the same level. Also, it was very interesting to have this panel. Congratulations, guys! Also, with the issue of being Eurocentric or not, it's nice that a panel where we had 2 Europeans have reached this conclusion, because I do believe that we are Eurocentric as being born and grown in Europe. Also because of the way in which football is done and is structured, and also because the European law and the European Court of Justice do have a lot of influence in how football regulations are finally drafted. And for me, for example, it was quite mind-opening going to another part of the world and considering things from another perspective. So it's interesting that you already had the opportunity of coming, let's say, to having this point of view and this conclusion. And Standard de Liège, watch out, because we don't want the club to be sanctioned. Or if you will need a lawyer, then if you will have a case before FIFA and CAS. Okay, so congratulations, guys. Excellent. Now the last panel, Lorenzo from Colombia. We finish with a very interesting topic. Is it still a hot topic, Lorenzo, or is it an old topic of last year? You have big news from today. There wasn't the announce, no?
Yeah.
Right. So you will discuss about this.
About that.
Okay. So last panel, big responsibility. Lorenzo, you're gonna stand here. Yeah. Okay.
Microphone. Thank you.
Hey guys, if we could wait 1 minute, I think David is in the bathroom. So yeah, So thank you. No, I think it's going to be short. Don't worry, guys. So guys, if you want, well, David, come back. And before presenting this guide, we're going to present you a little video we did for our roundtable. I hope you enjoy it. Not that long. Okay, so now that David is back, as you have seen in the video, we are going to talk about the Super League. As we were talking with Stefano, this is not an old topic. We have hot news from today that maybe Enrique is going to talk a little bit more about that. But today there was a decision from a commercial judge here in Madrid that determined that they will continue the process. So the process has not finished, and UEFA, FIFA, and all the participants in the process will continue with this against this Madrid court and see what is going to happen. But as I told you, we are going to present you the first one here. It's David Granados, Mexican lawyer, expert in the sports law, and he's going to present the position to you of the sports model in USA. So what it's sportainment, that we think it's a really important topic to touch on or to discuss in this session. Then we have Luis Puente. Luis Puente is going to represent or to protect or show how is the position of the Founders Club that continue in the process of Super League, which will be Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Juventus. Then we will have Juan Sunjay, another lawyer that is going to present the position now of those teams that started with the process of Super League, focused in the Premier League aspect. So he will be like representing the FA position regarding the Super League. And finally, but not least, Enrique, who is going to protect or show the position regarding UEFA and the main battle they have against Super League. We're going to put the discussion in three different aspects, as you saw on the video. First one, economical one. Second one, like legal or legality of the measures taken against the clubs that participated in this Super League. And finally, we're going to do a comparison or see how it's going to be the model with the US regarding, as we know, the no relegation, no promotion, franchises, something like it's quite a little bit, we could say, alike to the Super League. So as the first question, and I think Enrique is going to start, we would like to ask how are going to be the benefits of the Super League and the champions given to those that participate in those different championships, And if you think with those teams that do not participate in those championships, it could be a big gap or could be a big problem with them not being able to go for those benefits.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much, Lorenzo, for introducing us. And good afternoon to everybody, to my colleagues here, and to everybody watching. Well, the Super League was or is, we still don't know, a project created by, well, based on financial interest, on self interest of some teams, that some of them are ones of the highest revenue incomes. And their argument was because of the pandemic and the hit they had with all the losses they had, they need a new structure, a new sporting structure. But still, their income was millionaire. They are still getting a revenue of millions. Yet the pandemic hit all of us, from institutions to clubs, even the small clubs that they don't have even the half of just one of the founder teams. So clearly there is a gap. There's a gap between the clubs, between the most popular clubs with the biggest sponsors, with the biggest investors, and all the rest. And creating such a league like this will only increase it, or will only accentuate this even more. We can have an example of this kind of financial benefit or interest in how the Super League was going to split. That there was the 32.5% was going to be split among the founders, the founder clubs, another 32.5% among the 20, the total of clubs in the Super League. The 20% will be based on the sport performance. And I think we all can remember the last final of the Champions League, that there are two of the founder clubs in this case, and the last 15 allocated based on the audience. So that is the model of the split in the Super League. The traditional way, or the one is used by Uefa, is from the incomes, and 93.5% is allocated among all teams, and only a 6.5% remains with Uefa. So finally, to add, Uefa just sold a couple of months the broadcasting rights for the next seasons, from the season 2024 to the 2027, in a total of 15 billion euro. That is divided into each season, 5 billion euro. That is 1 billion more than whatever the Super League was aspiring for.
Much, Enrique. And now, of course, Luis, it's your time. Of course, you're going to tell us why it's good, the Super League, and how are the benefits going to be shared.
Thank you, Ricky, for your answer. First of all, I would like to make it clear that in economic terms, the Super League is much more profitable than the Champions League. This will be an initial forecast, which will certainly increase over the years. But in the first years, the Super League will distribute an amount of 4 million to among the teams, as much as is twice as much the Champions League. In addition, the founding teams will be given a bonus of 3.5 billion from JP Morgan to improve the infrastructure or mitigate the damage of COVID-19. Finally, in the Super League, the clubs will not be allowed to spend more than 55% of the budget on transfer, agents' commission, or salaries. And finally, we'll have to accumulate at least 3 years of pre-taxes profits. like Lorenzo said, the risks of the rest of the teams that no stay in the Super League, in my opinion, they would benefit because if the big teams of the league would have more money, therefore will make more transfer. They buy more players, and this will be distributed among the teams. I don't think that the money only stay in the big teams, so it will not generate the risk than the UEFA and the local league set.
Luis, and now Juan, because you were with them and now you're out, we want to know your opinion about the benefits, please.
Thank you, Lorenzo, for inviting me here. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. After hearing the different views from my colleagues, the source of revenue from the Super League in general is of a capital injection never seen or in football history. That will have negative impacts on middle, humble, and even top clubs that are not part of this Super League. It would impact them severely, as these teams will go into transfer windows with budgets similar to that of Manchester City or PSG. Hence, make the other market opportunities for other clubs decrease drastically to a level they would not be able to compete and not be able to afford to buy players to compete in their regular or domestic leagues. For that reason, in representation of the FA, I have decided to take the example of the Premier League. The Premier League now currently generates around 1.5 billion pounds in broadcasting domestically. Overseas is 1.3 million pounds. So we take in total, we're talking about 2.8 billion pounds. If we include the financial assets and the revenues from the broadcasting in Uefa, champions that being Europa, Champions League, now the Conference League, we might even go to the 3.8 billion euros. So in that consequence, it is not profitable for English teams to enter this Super League, as it would damage them very much. And curious fact, from each of the broadcasting, it is shared equally amongst the teams. So that's to say 80 million would go to each team equally, plus another 5.6 million from the commercial venue, according to the Premier League. So we're talking about almost 86 million. It's a lot of money to withdraw and to lose from one competition.
Thank you, Juan. And David, now your opinion, please, with the economic benefits.
Good afternoon. Well, as my colleague Juan said, it was from the English Premier League, it was 3.8 billion. But actually, last year they made $5.3 billion. And they weren't even close to the top 3 leagues in the world, which are franchises. Closed system, American system. The NBA made 8 million, the MLB made 10 billion, and the NFL made 16 billion. So saying that with the new regulations of FIFA and the new Champions League format, the teams will earn more, actually not. I mean, returning to what was Luis saying, sorry. The current teams staying in their proper leagues, they will share that revenue, and the big teams will play in the closed league. And only the big teams will share that revenue. It's a franchise mode. It's a good system. And right now, to be fair, football, it's more, instead of being a sport, it's more like a stock market. The players are getting inflation. It's a consequence of globalization. And if the big clubs don't do something about it, I think maybe, I'm not saying in 5, 10, maybe 15 years, the same system is not going to be stable as it is right now. And the thing is, the Super League and in economics is going to give it a more stable system, but most important, a more stable business. Because at the end of everything, this is a business and it's entertainment.
Okay, thank you very much, all of you. As you can see, we have been talking about really big numbers, different ways of giving these type of benefits to each one. But I think the second important question we have to know here, it's about the, of course, sanctions and the topic about legality. So Juan, we would like to know if you think the sanctions imposed the clubs, of course, you were being one of those. You think they were fair? They have been effective? They have been under the jurisdiction what UEFA and FIFA determines?
Yes, I believe the justification for being banned from football competitions, not only was it effective, but also necessary. For it, it ensured the competitiveness, the fairness, the preservation of the values of football. Those values were under threat from this format that was presented with the Super League, whose main objective was to make the participating teams richer through an aggressive method or format. Hence the strong commitment and collective statement given by UEFA, FIFA, these international organizations responsible for football, in conjunction with the national associations and football league sporting bodies, show a strong commitment to fight against this policy. Also, to show the success of their iconic competitions, increase global competitiveness, and maximize the impact of football globally. In other words, the power of football in society is on display. It is the game that brings people together, inspires generations, and promotes teamwork. This project by the Super League is mainly to generate more profit, which is a direct attack and threat to the true spirit of football. In practice, the Super League is dead. However, in paper, legally speaking, it still exists. The original founders, or the remaining founders, better said, have raised the question before the Court of Justice of the European Union about the legality based on the EU competition law. Hence, at the present, it's standby mode. We don't know what might happen or what's going to happen. And from precedents from other resolutions from the Court of Justice of the European Union, it might be a while since we might get an official answer. Secondly, I would like to refer to the Premier League sanctions. They were effective, primarily because the 6 clubs, Arsenal, City, Manchester United, Tottenham, Chelsea, and Liverpool, they were forced to accept the consequences due to the high criticism from fans because and former players, as we saw in the video. James Milner is one of the examples who was against this. It's against the true spirit of sport. And possibly to break the facts, to break the football competition in England as we know it unilaterally by 6 clubs is unacceptable and unseen in football. Also, the threat of not playing in this league, from our point of view in the FA, is unthinkable. For the Premier League is the most watched and entertain league worldwide. It has an accumulated audience of 4.7 billion. So the potential loss of revenue for these teams and the league itself is unthinkable and unbearable. In other words, it's suicide. And to finish, one of the points that is now going to come into effective is that the Premier League, in association with the FA, have adopted a rule called L9, which basically states that during the competitions in that season, no team can enter into any other competitions without the authority of the other clubs in conjunction with the board. So if the Super League was to take place and these 6 teams would participate, they would not only be sanctioned with a fine of 35 million, but they would also be excluded for a period of 3 years in the Premier League.
Thank you, Juan. And Luis, with these hard things been saying about the monopoly of football and everything, what do you think about sanctions and the legality of them?
For me, the sanctions imposed by the UEFA are not being enforced. In the first place, for the dependent clubs, have been forced to pay forfeit 5% of the revenues in one season of the UEFA Champions League. Have to pay a donation for 15 million to the local communities. Have to pay a fine of 100 million euros if they ever seek to play in authorized competition. Finally, if they breach any other commitments they have made to the continental competition, should be paid an amount of money of 100 million of euros. For me, the sanctions are not being enforced for 2 reasons. If the sanction propose that the clubs have less money to invest, And the second one, and for me the most important, is that these sanctions provoke that the UEFA gaining even more power than it had before. And the UEFA right now have a total power of this class over the future. And regarding with the clubs that still belong to the Super League, recently the commercial court of Madrid raised the precautionary measure that prevent the sanction of the clubs. UEFA has not reopened the sanction file. It is known that he has not have the legal basis to do. So in the unlikely event that it couldn't sanction Madrid, Barcelona, and Juventus, the champions will be greatly damaged, in my opinion, because a competition without the three of the best team in the world will lose value, and only the teams. The damage is for the football in general, and not only for the sanctioning teams.
Thank you, Luis. And Enrique, please, that you are aware of the integrity of every competition. What do you think with this?
Well, yeah, for starting, these sanctions are just because of acts of selfish clubs. But it's still, like my colleague was saying, they are necessary on the validity. I'm still like expecting of the applicable effectiveness. He was talking about the first suspension. It was a suspension of 3 years and the probably expulsion of the story of itself of the competitions from these teams. And the Champions League as well as the Europa League in their the regulations they establish that if the season has already started, they cannot be expelled, but still if they don't comply with I think it was Article 4, they can be banned, or they can be excluded for entry in the next season, in the following season. So there is a particular way, a proceeding they can be banned in another matter of speaking. And also the justification for this exclusion for a rival league for the European competitions are relying on the aspects of the game sports model and the sports merit and the existing pyramid that's governing the whole Europe sports model as in general. So it's a very broad and very rich, powerful way of looking at it. So I think it's something to take in consideration, but still with the sanctions since last year, UEFA was like ordered to abandon his idea to expel the teams. Also to abandon the idea of filing the bailing teams. So it's in a standby still. Like you were saying at the beginning, we just yesterday here at Madrid, judge ordered the dismiss of the UEFA petition to end the process, to end the process. So I mean, we still have a lot of time to look at the repercussions and the fallout that it will cause, and we will see at the end what's the validity of the sanctions.
Okay, thank you very much. And as you can see, it's still very I don't know, hot topic to talk about. And as we have seen already, the economic benefits, the legality of sanctions and everything. The last topic I want to talk about, you four, it's this type of closed model, similar to the US model. I want to know your opinion, if you think in the future of European market, this could be a viable model to apply. It would be good, it would be no good. So if you want, maybe Enrique, you can start to tell us what do you think about this. I want to start.
Yeah, well, the franchise model, it has its advantages, especially talking about economically. And it's undeniable that you can see how prosperous it has been in the American continent. As an example, we can see that the most valuable teams in the world, they all came from the United States. However, no matter how effective it is, I think it will be difficult to enter into the European football system because it is not a model that is constrained in the society here. In Europe, they have been implemented from long ago another models, another system, which is rooted in the continent's football tradition and culture. The European model is based on principles and is based on the principles of sports merit and also on the open sports competition. Under that principle that being said, the closed sport competitions are seen as anti-competitive, and in the sports qualifying process, it's where they rely the merit. So the American model is more linked with economic and business interest, but at the end to answer, if you see it almost only last like a corporative business success or economic benefit, taking away a lot of other agents. Okay, maybe it can work. Otherwise, I don't think so. However, there are certain aspects that, for giving an example, can be taken from the American model to implement, to improve, to better, for making the system better in here, like a salary cap. In this case, I think the luxury task model that comes from the NBA, I think it will be proper instead of changing the whole model to just look at things that can work and implement them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That's a good idea you're giving, and by representing Uefa with this new idea, see, it's really interesting. And Luis, now that you want to implement the system closely like the US closed model, we want to know your opinion, please.
Okay, the four major American leagues like NBA, NFL, NHL are completely closed. These are no promotion or relegation, and the entry of the new teams has to be agreed for all the teams that stay in the competition. The Super League promote a mixed model that have 15 teams that are fixed, and they could play every year, but another 5 will change after year based on the previous season performance. And I understand that people said it's unfair that 15 teams are fixed in the Super League, but I would like them to ask themselves how many times in Spain, for example, Real Madrid, Barcelona, or Atlético de Madrid have been out of the Champions League in the last 10 years. In short, I think that the closed system of the American models are not be viable in football, because you always have to give the opportunity to the small teams that with performance can reach the big competition. And I think that the Superliga do by the invitation.
Perfect. Juan, please.
Quickly, a model like we suggest, like any of the American model or models explained for the European football, for sure, it will be a huge source of money, spectacle for its participants, organizers, and the clubs. However, the problem is that the national divisions and the leagues would be orphaned without any of the great clubs. Nobody would be able to experiment anymore. That sensation to see those clubs play again in their national domestic leagues. And in another way, it would be less attractive and competitive, those leagues, certainly against this model, definitely. And this model would make football in Europe an exclusive club, meaning that only the wealthy teams and powerful could enter and participate, and exclude the humble teams or middle teams from entering or be subjected to a criteria based on the rules of this closed league. Hence, the adoption of this American model, viable sports and economic alternatives would have to be sought by the national leagues and the national federations. And in that way, clearly it goes against the principles of FIFA, which is to make football accessible to everyone, regardless of whether the wealth, the power, the trophy acquisitions, but based more on the merits and the perseverance of the teams during the seasons to be positioned within the top ranks of the table of those leagues in which they participate.
Thank you. And now the expert, please, in American model.
As a whole system, it will not work here because, as Enrique said, the European tradition is still very deep into the roots of the teams, into the clubs. But I think the leagues need to actually start making a combined model of the European with an ascension of clubs, different division, well, the pyramid scheme. But they need to add a salary cap. In my point of view, I think the regulations that FIFA makes with the financial fair play, they don't work because at the end, all the teams don't follow the rules. They keep spending. A lot of foreign investments are coming here in Europe. For example, 45% of the English Premier League clubs are owned or partially owned by an American firm. And we are not counting the Middle East invasion, the investment from the Middle East. But I think it's necessary for the sport to be stable, have a strong foundation again, and implementing a salary cap. It will be fun because you actually give an opportunity to the smaller clubs to actually be in the big competitions to earn more revenue. Because I know that maybe a lot of people here in Europe saying that the European system gives opportunity to everyone, but actually when you see it in a big perspective, it doesn't happen. Or maybe in the last 10 years, when investment became very big, it stopped happening because from now on, I mean, I'm from Mexico. We see the European leagues down there, but Champions League, I know that it's the same teams every year. And I think that needs to change. The salary cap, that would be amazing because you actually, right now, well, if you implement the salary cap, that means you need a good squad, a good system, but a good head of business to actually manage the business and to fulfill that salary cap.
Okay, so a big change if we think about not the sport with our hearts, but with a business mind. So we didn't have a lot of time to talk a lot of things, but we wanted to bring you these 3 topics of Super League: the economic aspect, different positions regarding the different positions they were defending, the legal aspect or legality of Super League as well, sanctions and everything, and do a little comparison with the US sports model, like a closed model that should be something similar to the Super League. So with this, I don't know if anyone has any question to do. No? Then I think, thank you very much. I hope you have enjoyed, and good night. Muy bien. Okay, so we are at the end. Congratulations to the last panel as well. Congratulations to all of you. It was a pleasure being here. I think I already said it, but I was quite satisfied, quite happy with the level of the conferences and with the way that you took, let's say, that you approached this task. I saw you were very enthusiastic, also sometimes funny, open, and I really appreciate it. I wanted to thank also Valkyria and Deborah for don't cry, Valkyria, because I have to say that as a professor, they make everything. They take care of everything for us, and everything that we need for the organization of this. And in general, they are very. I'm very thankful for your help and assistance. So, guys, I don't know if you have any questions or if you want to discuss with me anything at the end of the lecture. I will be available. Yesterday we had it was a bit more
in a hurry because we had more panels. But I would be happy to help you or discuss anything with you regarding your career or your internship, your ideas, because I saw that there was really, again, a lot of things from your side, and therefore I thank you and wish the best for all of you in the continuation of the course. Thank you. Bye bye.